Within the Ezio trilogy of games, there are a total of 55 Templars that range from members who have little power to the more well-known and influential leaders. With that said, today I'll be compiling all the Templar lore videos that I have made that cover the Ezio trilogy. I have made some edits to make it flow better, but with that said, please consider subscribing for a lot more Assassin's Creed content. Please leave a like as it always helps, and without further ado, sit back, relax, and let us get started. Uberto Alberti, who was born in 1416, spent most of his life in Florence and earned a reputation as a highly respected lawyer. Remarkably, despite being entirely self-taught, he won the majority of his cases. However, his career took a personal turn when the Medici Bank forced his family from their home, planting in him a deep resentment and a desire for revenge against the Medici. It was this bitterness that eventually drew him to the Templars, who promised him the opportunity to exact his revenge in exchange for his loyalty. After being elected to the Signoria, Uberto secretly allied with them, while outwardly strengthening his ties with the Medici, earning the trust of Lorenzo and presenting himself as a close confidant to Giovanni Auditore. During this period, Uberto advised both Lorenzo and Giovanni on political matters, and even took part in interrogating one of Rodrigo Borgia's agents concerning the planned assassination of Galeazzo Maria Sforza. When Giovanni intercepted a suspicious letter in Venice, Uberto was tasked with decoding it. Instead, after Antonio Maffei completed the deciphering, he arranged for a forged copy of the undeciphered letter to be delivered to Giovanni, sending him on a fruitless trail to Rome in pursuit of the supposed conspirators. Following Giovanni's near successful attempt to apprehend Rodrigo Borgia in Rome, Uberto attended a secret meeting with the Spaniard and other Templar leaders, where it was decided that Giovanni would need to be eliminated for their schemes to succeed. Sometime after, back in Florence, Ezio Auditore came across Uberto in Giovanni's study, where he and his father were discussing a matter of urgency. Giovanni quickly dismissed Ezio before he could grasp what was being spoken about. Unfortunately, soon after this meeting, Uberto issued warrants for the arrests of Giovanni along with Federico, Patricio, and Ezio himself, accusing them of treason. By chance, however, Ezio was doing errands for his father when the guards arrived. Later, Ezio secretly visited Giovanni in prison, where his father entrusted him with the letter for Uberto, which contained proof of a plot against the Medici that could clear their family's name. Upon receiving the letter, Uberto invited Ezio to remain at his home, likely intending to have him killed, but Ezio declined. When the day of the execution came in the Piazza della Signoria, Giovanni furiously reminded Uberto of the evidence Ezio had delivered, which proved their innocence. Uberto, however, feigned ignorance, denying any knowledge of the document before ordering the execution. As the sentence was carried out, Giovanni shouted that Uberto and his Templar allies would one day pay for their betrayal, moments before he and his sons were hanged. Once Ezio's training was complete, Paola instructed her courtesans to uncover Uberto's whereabouts. Their search revealed that he would be attending an art exhibition by Andrea del Verrocchio at the cloister of Santa Croce. As Ezio moved towards his target, Uberto was speaking with Lorenzo de' Medici, belittling him whilst boasting about the Auditore executions. Later, among other nobles, Uberto continued to revel in his cruelty, praising his own actions and mocking Ezio's family. At that moment, Ezio struck. Though Uberto noticed him at the last instant, he was too stunned to summon help. Ezio attacked swiftly, driving his hidden blade into Uberto's chest multiple times. As he lay dying, Uberto tried to excuse his betrayal as an act of love for his own family, but Ezio coldly rejected his words, leaving him to his fate. And so Uberto Alberti died on the 31st of December 1476 at the age of 60. Vieri de' Pazzi was born sometime in 1459 and was the youngest member of Florence's wealthy Pazzi family. He was the son of Francesco de' Pazzi, great-nephew of Jacopo de' Pazzi, and brother to Viola de' Pazzi, who is briefly referenced to early in the game. Little is recorded about his early years, but sometime in 1476 he made a terrible move. One evening he cornered Cristina Vespucci, a woman he desired, at her home in Florence. Cristina rejected his advances, but Vieri, however, pressed on, declaring that he had grown impatient waiting to sleep with her. Before he could act, Ezio Auditore, who had been watching from nearby, intervened. A heated exchange quickly turned into a fistfight, which Ezio won, and so Vieri fled but swore revenge, threatening that Ezio's entire family would pay for the interference. Later that same year, Vieri's father Francesco was arrested after Giovanni uncovered damning evidence against him. This intensified the feud between the Pazzis and the Auditores, tensions that eventually erupted into a violent street fight between the two young members of each family. In January of 1477, Vieri confronted Ezio in the Tuscan countryside as Ezio attempted to flee Florence with his mother and sister. Vieri ordered his soldiers to kill the fleeing Auditores, but Ezio managed to hold them off just long enough for Mario and his mercenaries to arrive. With their support, Ezio turned the tide of the skirmish, forcing Vieri to retreat from the area. The clash near Monteregione only intensified the conflict. Over the next 18 months, Vieri launched repeated assaults on the town, determined to break its defences. Finally, in April 1478, Ezio met Mario and his mercenaries near San Gimignano, where his uncle revealed their plan to eliminate Vieri once and for all, and end his grip over the city. Later that same evening, Vieri joined his father Francesco, his great-uncle Jacopo, and the Templar Grand Master Rodrigo Borgia. The gathering centred on their conspiracy to overthrow the Medici. Tasks were assigned to each member, with Vieri ordered to remain in San Gimignano to oversee the city's mercenaries. However, he expressed concern about Mario Auditore. Rodrigo dismissed his worries, assuring him that the Auditores would be dealt with in due time. The conspirators ended the meeting by swearing the Templar oath together, after which Francesco, Jacopo, and Rodrigo departed, leaving Vieri behind. Moments later, Mario and his mercenaries launched a surprise attack on the city. As the fighting erupted, Vieri retreated to the battlements to command his men. Unbeknownst to him though, Ezio had secretly observed the meeting and now followed, cutting down Vieri's guards before confronting him directly. The two clashed in a duel, but Ezio eventually bested his rival and drove his hidden blade into Vieri's chest. Grabbing the dying noble by the shirt, Ezio demanded answers, desperate to know the true purpose of the Templar conspiracy and whether his father's death was tied to it. Vieri, however, refused to yield, using his final breaths to sneer at Ezio and mock him for expecting any kind of confession. With that, he collapsed and died at the age of only 19, on the 21st of April 1478. But in 1511, 33 years after Vieri's death, an older Ezio attended a banquet in Constantinople where he performed a song mocking his old rival.
Vieri, oh Vieri, yes, he of Pazzi fame, was just as mad as his old man, and ended just the same.
Francesco grew up in Florence as a noble during a time when the city was enthralled by the rising power of the Medici family. From a young age, he was taught to scorn the middle class and those who sought to rise above their station, ambitions that the Medici embodied. As he matured, Francesco watched with bitterness as the Medici bank steadily overshadowed his own, while his family's centuries-old influence within the Florentine government dwindled. The collapse of his financial power and the erosion of his political standing fueled a deep resentment toward the Medici in particular. It was during this period that Rodrigo Borgia approached Francesco with a proposition that promised mutual benefit: the elimination of the Medici. Francesco readily agreed, setting into motion the beginnings of conspiracy against them. However, in December 1476, he was arrested by the assassin Giovanni Auditore, who accused him of involvement in the murder of Galeazzo Maria Sforza, the Duke of Milan. Giovanni prepared to bring evidence against him before the courts, but was betrayed by Uberto Alberti. With Giovanni executed and the evidence destroyed, the charges against Francesco collapsed and he walked free. In 1478, Francesco gathered with his fellow Templar conspirators in San Gimignano. His role was to organise the Templar forces within Florence and send word when the time came to strike. Later that year, he met with the group again, this time in the catacombs beneath Santa Maria Novella, where they finalised their scheme to overthrow the Medici and seize control of the city. The plot came to a head during High Mass the next morning at the Duomo. Francesco and his allies launched their assault, charging at the Medici brothers. Francesco himself struck Giuliano, stabbing him repeatedly until he was dead. The attempt on Lorenzo, however, failed, and Ezio managed to get him away safely. Not long after, Ezio discovered that Francesco was leading a battalion around the back of the Palazzo della Signoria. Once there, he found Francesco on the prison ramparts, where the Templar mocked him before ordering his men to attack. Ezio cut his way through the soldiers and climbed onto the rooftops of the palazzo, battling his way to Francesco's position. When confronted, Francesco cursed the assassin and leapt from the ramparts into a hay cart, forcing Ezio to give chase through the streets of Florence. The pursuit ended when Ezio finally caught him and delivered the fatal blow. As he lay dying, Francesco admitted only that the conspiracy had failed and that everything was lost. His body was later displayed by Medici supporters, hung from the top of the palazzo as a warning. Francesco met his end on April 26th, 1478, at the age of 34. Antonio Maffei was born in Volterra, Tuscany in 1450. In 1472, he witnessed his hometown sacked by Florentine mercenaries and blamed Lorenzo de' Medici for the devastation. Seeking vengeance, he joined the Templar Order. In 1476, when Giovanni Auditore intercepted an encrypted letter, Uberto recognized the seal of the Barbarigo family. Knowing that the translation would take hours, he entrusted the task to Father Maffei. Later that night, Maffei presented the translated letter to Uberto, who praised his skill and instructed him to fetch Giovanni. Before leaving, Antonio swore a vow of silence, pledging not to reveal the letter's contents. When Giovanni arrived, he observed Maffei creating a duplicate of the letter. Uberto explained that they had been unable to decode it and handed the copy to Giovanni to deliver it to Rome, its intended destination. Later that same year, after Giovanni's failed attempt to capture Grandmaster Rodrigo Borgia, he returned home to Florence, wounded and exhausted. While his wife Maria tended to his injuries, Father Maffei arrived with armed guards, demanding entry to Auditore's residence and custody of Giovanni. Giovanni, however, instructed his eldest son, Federico, to delay Antonio, allowing him to escape through a hidden passage. When Antonio eventually gained entry and discovered Giovanni had fled, he grew frustrated and left the house. On April 25, 1478, Antonio Maffei met with his fellow Templar conspirators in the catacombs beneath Santa Maria Novella, though he remained silent during the discussion. He did not object to any of the plans proposed by the others, and so when the day of the assassination arrived, Antonio attempted to stab Lorenzo, but then briefly struggled with him. As Lorenzo rose and drew his sword, Antonio was forced to retreat. After the Templars' failure in Florence, Antonio fled to San Gimignano in Tuscany, taking refuge atop one of the city's towering spires. From there, he loudly recited biblical passages while archers patrolled the tower, ready to defend him. Ezio, having learned of Antonio's location from one of his uncle's mercenaries, began his ascent of the towering structure. Upon reaching the top, he silently dispatched the patrolling archers before climbing a ladder to confront Antonio directly. The two engaged in a fierce duel, but despite Antonio's frenzied attacks and his repeated cries of divine protection, he was no match for Ezio. The assassin ultimately threw the mad monk from the tower, ending his life. As he fell, Antonio cursed Ezio, calling him a demon, before dying in 1478 at the age of 28. Francesco Salviati was a man consumed by ambition, utterly convinced that he was destined to become the next Archbishop of Florence. His aspirations, however, were shattered when Lorenzo stood in his way. Publicly denied the position he so desperately sought, Francesco's ambition curdled into hatred, and from that moment onward, he vowed to exact his revenge against the Medici family. The Templars quickly recognised his value, seeing in Francesco both an eager conspirator and a man whose influence within the church could greatly advance their cause. Wealth was already on Francesco's side, thanks to his ties to Pope Sixtus IV, and he used his resources to purchase a Tuscan villa in 1475. Over the following years, he poured money into extensive renovations, reshaping the villa in the elegant Tuscan style. Outwardly, it was the estate of a rising churchman preparing for his inevitable ascension, but in reality, it became the place where Francesco nurtured his resentment and quietly plotted the downfall of the Medici alongside his allies in the Pazzi family. The chance for revenge finally came with the infamous Pazzi conspiracy. While Francesco's co-conspirators orchestrated the attempted assassination of Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano within Florence, Francesco himself led his men into the city to carry out a coordinated assault. When the conspiracy unraveled, many fled in panic. Francesco, realising his life was now forfeit, abandoned his allies and escaped into the Italian countryside. In desperation, he traded clothes with a farmer, hoping to vanish into obscurity, but his deceit had deadly consequences. The farmer was mistaken for the fugitive and hung in his place. Meanwhile, Francesco retreated to his villa. There in the quiet hills of Tuscany, he tried to shield himself from the inevitable. He barricaded the villa, surrounding himself with guards. Francesco's worst fear came to life when the assassin finally tracked him to his villa. Despite the barricades and the guards he had placed around the estate, Ezio slipped past the defences, cutting down resistance as he moved deeper into the villa. Once inside, he opened the gates and allowed the mercenaries under the command of his uncle Mario to pour into the villa. The quiet hills of Tuscany were suddenly filled with a clash of steel and the shouts of men as battle erupted between Francesco's loyal guards and the forces allied with the assassins. Within the chaos, Ezio confronted Francesco himself. The two exchanged words as much as they exchanged blows. Francesco, once a man of ambition and confidence, now lashed out with anger and desperation, railing against the Medici and cursing Ezio for standing in his way. But Ezio pressed forward until the man of God was overwhelmed. With his defeat inevitable, Francesco collapsed, gravely wounded. On April 12, 1479, at the age of just 36, Francesco Salviati's life came to an end. Bernardo di Bandino Baroncelli was born in 1453, raised in an environment steeped in bitterness toward the Medici family. His cousins had been exiled by them, and this injustice took root in Bernardo's heart, shaping him from a young age into a man consumed by resentment. That hatred eventually found purpose when he entered the service of the Pazzi family, where he became a banker and through his employer Jacopo de Pazzi, was drawn into the ranks of the Templar Order. By 1478, the Pazzi conspiracy was in motion, and the secret meeting beneath the Santa Maria Novella, Bernardo pledged his loyalty to the cause. He offered not only weapons, but also his own blade for the murder of Lorenzo. On the day of the assassination attempt, Bernardo was among the first to act. As the chaos erupted, he lunged forward, striking Giuliano with a swift stab. His attack was driven not by strategy or duty, but by the deeply ingrained hatred that had fueled him since childhood. Though Giuliano would be brutally finished off by Francesco, Bernardo's role as one of the opening aggressors sealed his place in the bloody act. Yet when the attempt on Lorenzo failed and the conspiracy unravelled, Bernardo's courage faltered. Instead of standing with his co-conspirators, he fled the scene, abandoning them to their fates. After fleeing to Constantinople, he was captured there and was being transported back to Florence for punishment. But fortune favoured him. He managed to escape his captors and slipped back into Italy. In 1479, word reached Ezio that Bernardo had escaped justice and was hiding in San Gimignano. Local mercenaries had tried to flush him out, but Bernardo proved elusive. Ezio, however, had more than steel at his disposal. He had the gift of eagle vision. Scanning the crowded markets, he was able to single out the fugitive. Ezio moved swiftly, striking before Bernardo's paranoia could save him. On May 3rd, 1479, Bernardo Baroncelli was killed at just 26 years old. Stefano was born in 1418 in the small town of Baglione. At some point in his life, he chose the path of the church and became a monk, but beneath the robes of faith lay a far darker allegiance. Eventually, Stefano pledged himself to the Templar Order and was trained in Rome, not in scripture or devotion, but in cruelty. His skill as a torturer became his defining role. His intellect and discipline made him useful beyond the dungeon as well, and he served as a secretary to Jacopo de Pazzi, one of the leading figures in the infamous conspiracy against the Medici. When the Templars convened in the secrecy beneath Santa Maria Novella, Stefano was among those who gave their blessings to the plan. To the Templars, Florence represented a jewel of power, and with Lorenzo removed, their influence could spread unchecked. Stefano, devout not to God but to the cause of the order, lent his voice and his blade to their scheme. On the fateful day of the assassination attempt, Stefano struck quickly and viciously. As Lorenzo turned around, Stefano rushed forward and slashed across his back. But before he could finish the job, Lorenzo's allies came to his defense. Realizing the attempt had failed, Stefano fled the scene, vanishing into the chaos while others of the conspiracy met their bloody ends. Though the plot unravelled, Stefano remained steadfast in his loyalty to the Templars. He slipped away into the Tuscan countryside, seeking safety within the walls of the monastery, at the Monte Oliveto Maggiore. There he was hidden among the holy men, where he believed he could escape the eyes of the assassins. Yet even in the company of monks, his nature betrayed him. Rather than preach faith, he spread doubt, speaking of the non-existence of God and trying to convince others to abandon their belief. It was within this monastery that Ezio tracked him down. To find him, Ezio blended with the monks, walking silently among them until he could single out the conspirator. Stefano's disguise, so similar to the robes of those around him, forced Ezio to rely on his eagle vision, revealing the Templar hidden in plain sight. Ezio found him mid-conversation, fervently proclaiming his beliefs to another priest. In 1479, Ezio struck with his hidden blade, ending Stefano's life at the age of 61. In 1478, Jacopo de Pazzi, patriarch of the Pazzi family and a prominent member of the Templar Order, convened with his conspirators in San Gimignano. Together, they outlined their ambitious plan to overthrow the Medici's rule in Florence. Jacopo was an experienced schemer with vast wealth and political connections, and so he was entrusted with the crucial role of quelling the Florentine populace once the deed was done. His task was to pacify the people and ensure the transition of power went smoothly after the Medici were eliminated. Later at the secret meeting, Jacopo raised his voice in caution. He expressed genuine concern about underestimating their enemies, wary of the influence that Lorenzo commanded. The following morning, the plan was put into action. As Francesco and the other conspirators launched their brutal attack on the Medici brothers, Jacopo rallied the Pazzi loyalists in front of the Palazzo della Signoria. Standing before the crowd, he cried out for liberty, urging Florentines to rise against Medici tyranny. Yet his grand display of authority and defiance was short-lived. To his horror, the mutilated body of Francesco was hurled over the palazzo's facade. Panic gripped Jacopo. What was meant to be a moment of victory had instead descended into humiliation and disaster. Without hesitation, he fled Florence, seeking refuge within the fortified walls of San Gimignano. There, Jacopo used his wealth and resources to disappear into the city, surrounding himself with guards and fortifications. His influence allowed him to remain hidden, but unlike him, his fellow conspirators lacked such means. One by one, they were hunted down by Ezio. Through these assassinations, Ezio uncovered intelligence pointing to yet another Templar meeting, one that Jacopo himself would attend. In 1480, Ezio finally closed in on his quarry. Tracking Jacopo to a church within San Gimignano, the assassin shadowed him from the rooftops as he made his way to an ancient Roman theatre. There, Jacopo joined Rodrigo Borgia and Emilio Barbarigo, a powerful Venetian merchant and Templar ally. Jacopo was visibly uneasy and attempted to explain away the disaster in Florence. He shifted the blame onto Francesco, condemning him as reckless and impulsive, whilst also chastising Emilio for supplying inferior weapons that had hindered their plans. His words, however, struck no chord of sympathy. In a sudden act of brutal judgment, he drove a stiletto into Jacopo's stomach. Staggering, he turned to Emilio, pleading desperately for mercy. But mercy was not to be found. Emilio, unmoved by his cries, thrust his blade into Jacopo a second time and shoved him to the ground. Rodrigo was not yet satisfied and brandished his weapon once more to pierce Jacopo's neck with a final decisive strike. As life drained from him, Jacopo de Pazzi collapsed, abandoned and betrayed by those he had served so loyally. Rodrigo was unfazed and turned his attention to Ezio, whom he and Emilio had already suspected of lurking nearby. He ordered his guards to find the assassin and kill him before departing with his Venetian ally. Ezio, however, fought his way through the ambush, vanquishing the men sent to silence him. When the dust settled, he approached the mortally wounded Jacopo. In a final act of mercy, Ezio ended his suffering with the hidden blade. Jacopo de Pazzi, once a wealthy nobleman and proud Templar, died on January 3rd, 1480, at the age of 59. Emilio Barbarigo rose to prominence in Venice through the strength of his influential family and the ruthless cunning of his own ambition. With the Barbarigo name behind him, he seized control of the city's mercantile power by systematically edging out his rivals, lobbying the Venetian government, and bending the city's laws to his will. Using his large wealth, Emilio went a step further. He financed the entire Venetian police force. This clever maneuver granted him sweeping influence, shielding his finances from taxation, whilst ensuring the streets were kept free of crime, except when that crime served his own purposes. Any merchant who dared oppose him or failed to pay their rent on time quickly found their livelihood destroyed, their stands smashed beneath the boots of his soldiers. His resources and authority did not go unnoticed by the Templar Order. Emilio became a vital cog in their operations, responsible for supplying weapons to their conspirators in Florence and beyond. His wealth and influence allowed him to maintain a significant role in Templar affairs, and he established his residence in the imposing Palazzo della Seta, a fortress-like palace in San Polo. Surrounded by tall iron fences, vigilant archers, and brutish guards, the palazzo stood as both a symbol of Emilio's power and a statement of defiance to anyone who might think to challenge it. In 1480, Emilio attended a gathering in a ruined Roman theatre in Tuscany. The meeting had been intended for the Pazzi conspirators, though only Jacopo de Pazzi managed to appear. This encounter solidified Emilio's standing within the order. By 1481, Emilio's dominion over San Polo was absolute. Merchants lived in constant fear of his guards, who patrolled the streets and enforced his will. The Venetian Thieves Guild, headquartered in San Polo itself and led by the charismatic Antonio, grew restless under Emilio's suffocating rule. When Ezio arrived in Venice seeking allies against the Templars, Antonio and his thieves joined forces with him. For years they prepared in the shadows, chipping away at Emilio's stranglehold on the city. Finally, on September 11th, 1485, after 4 long years of quiet resistance, the thieves judged the time was right to strike. Ezio scaled the rooftops of the Palazzo della Seta, watching his target closely as Emilio conducted his affairs within the courtyard below. That evening, Ezio witnessed Emilio meet with fellow Templar Carlo Grimaldi, a powerful member of Venice's Council of Ten. Their conversation revealed troubling news. Carlo warned Emilio that an assassin hunted him and urged him to remain cautious. He also spoke of a forthcoming Templar meeting, scheduled at the Santo Stefano in 3 days' time, by Rodrigo Borgia himself. Carlo, ever pragmatic, advised Emilio to abandon his fortress at San Polo and move somewhere less conspicuous, where the assassin's reach would not be so keenly felt. But Emilio, arrogant and entrenched, refused to abandon the power he had built. After Carlo departed, he ordered his men to prepare his boat and begin loading it with his possessions, intending only to strengthen his hold, not flee from it. Yet before his escape could be arranged, Ezio drove his hidden blade into Emilio, ending his reign of oppression in an instant. Emilio Barbarigo died on September 11, 1485, at the age of 63. Carlo Grimaldi had always been a political animal, driven from childhood by an insatiable hunger for influence. For him, true power was not found in the battlefield, but in the council chamber, in the ability to bend laws and men to his will. Carlo was fortunate to enjoy the acquaintance of Giovanni Mocenigo, the Doge of Venice, and he laboured tirelessly to strengthen that bond. He carefully cultivated trust, presenting himself as both loyal and indispensable. But ambition required more than loyalty. It required ruthless action. That opportunity arrived when Carlo discovered a secret involving Ignazio Contarini, a respected Venetian politician. Ignazio's daughter had fallen in love with the son of a servant, a scandalous match that defied her father's wishes. Seizing upon this, Carlo crafted a deception. He convinced the young couple that escape was possible, urging them to flee by boat under the cover of night. But when the lovers arrived at the appointed place, freedom was not waiting for them. Carlo stood there with armed men, and Ignazio himself. The servant's son was slaughtered on the spot, and the terrified daughter was dragged back into her father's grasp. The betrayal was cold, calculated, and effective. Ignazio was grateful that his honour had been preserved, and so he praised Carlo lavishly to the Doge. Giovanni Mocenigo rewarded Carlo with a coveted seat on the Council of Ten. Years later, in 1485, Carlo's ambition drew him deeper into the orbit of the Templar Order. Shortly before Emilio Barbarigo's assassination, Carlo had met with him, unaware of how close Ezio was. Soon after, he joined a gathering in the streets of Venice with Marco Barbarigo, Silvio Barbarigo, Dante Moreau, and Rodrigo Borgia. Together, they conspired to eliminate the sitting Doge, paving the way for one of their own to ascend and secure Venice fully for the Templars. Given the task to sway Giovanni Mocenigo to their cause, Carlo tried to persuade the Doge with pleas, warnings, and carefully crafted false concern. But Mocenigo, an experienced statesman, would not bend to manipulation. His refusal sealed his fate. Carlo arranged one final meeting at the Palazzo Ducale, cloaking his intent beneath the guise of a simple game of chess. Carlo poured wine laced with cantarella, a potent poison. He encouraged the Doge to drink. A sudden noise from the roof threatened to unravel the scheme, but Carlo dismissed it with a clever lie, assuring Mocenigo it was nothing more than children with firecrackers. After this, the Doge drank deeply, and the poison began to work almost immediately. It was at this moment that Ezio burst into the chamber, swooping through the window in Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine. He accused Carlo of treachery, but the assassin was too late. The Doge had already succumbed to the poison. Racked with pain, Mocenigo collapsed, while Carlo fled the chamber, shouting that it was Ezio who had murdered the Doge. The lie was convincing enough to stir chaos, but Ezio pursued him relentlessly through the halls of the palazzo. With the hidden blade, Ezio silenced the traitor once and for all. Carlo Grimaldi died on September 14th, 1485, at the age of 40. Marco Barbarigo was born around 1413, and from a young age he displayed a cruel nature, treating those beneath him as little more than servants whose sole purpose was to obey. He demanded absolute submission, and in return offered only the promise of continued employment. This hunger for control only deepened as he grew older, shaping his character and eventually leading him into the embrace of the Templar Order. As the eldest of two sons, Marco was the pride of his family and the recipient of their boundless indulgence. Ships, gold, fine clothing and jewellery, anything he desired was placed at his feet. Such excess only sharpened his greed, encouraging him to take what he wanted regardless of the cost to others. One of the most infamous examples of this was his pursuit of Carlotta Moreau, the wife of his friend and bodyguard, Dante Moreau. Marco's obsession with Carlotta led him to orchestrate a treacherous plot against Dante. Hired killers ambushed Dante, stabbing him 3 times in the torso and once in the head, with the goal to eliminate him. Against all odds, Dante survived the attacks, though not unscathed. The head wound left him with lasting brain damage, stripping him from his independence and higher reasoning. Marco seized upon Dante's weakness. Forcing him to renounce his marriage, Marco claimed Carlotta for himself. Though Carlotta complied outwardly, she never ceased to hope for Dante's recovery. Marco's ties to the Templar Order grew stronger in the years that followed. In 1476, he was entrusted with delivering an important letter bound for Pope Sixtus IV in Rome. The message, passed to him at the Palazzo Ducale, was meant to reach Rodrigo Borgia, but fate intervened when the courier carrying it was intercepted by Giovanni. Giovanni's boldness forced the Templars to act swiftly, and when Rodrigo convened his allies to plot Giovanni's elimination, Marco was among those present at the table. Nearly a decade later, following the death of Doge Giovanni Mocenigo, poisoned under the direction of Carlo Grimaldi, Marco seized the opportunity he had long craved. With the backing of his family and the Templar Order, he was appointed as the new Doge of Venice. Almost immediately, he declared Ezio an enemy of the Republic, blaming him for Mocenigo's death. Yet despite his lofty position, Marco ruled not with presence, but with fear and seclusion. His only true indulgence came during the Carnevale, the city's great festival. Attendance was exclusive and controlled by the possession of a golden mask. What Marco did not anticipate was that Ezio would claim one of these masks for himself. Using the mask as his key, Ezio infiltrated the party, moving through the crowds until he had the Doge in his sights. The end came swiftly. With the concealed firearm hidden within his bracer, Ezio fired a single shot. The bullet struck Marco where he stood, silencing him in front of his startled guests. On February 15th, 1486, Marco's reign as Doge ended, at the age of 73. Silvio Barbarigo was born into the wealth and privilege of the Venetian elite. From his earliest years, however, his world was shaped not by benevolence, but by violence and greed. His father, a man of his own ambitions, was murdered by Silvio's uncle, a ruthless move designed to secure greater control over the family's vast fortune. Robbed of his father, Silvio was forced to live under the roof of the very man who had orchestrated his death. Yet, what was intended as an act of dominance soon backfired. Rather than cowing the young Barbarigo, the experience hardened him. Patient and calculating, Silvio wormed his way through his uncle's trust. One of his earliest displays of cunning came when he uncovered a conspiracy against his uncle, hatched by the rival Soranzo family. Silvio acted decisively. He extended to the Soranzos an invitation to an Easter feast, making his true intent with false hospitality. As their children played in the courtyard below, Silvio raised a toast to his unsuspecting guests. In that moment, archers hidden at key vantage points loosed a storm of arrows into the courtyard, cutting down the Soranzo family where they stood. 10 years later, Silvio enacted a far more personal act of vengeance. Never forgetting the betrayal that had stolen his father's life, he turned on his uncle. Manipulating his mother and sister, he persuaded them to assist in the murder, ensuring the deed was carried out within the very walls of the palazzo. The uncle was slain, and Silvio declared to the household that the old man had died peacefully in his sleep. It was this ruthless ambition that made him a valuable ally to the Templar Order. During their secret councils in Venice, Silvio played an instrumental role, even volunteering to acquire Cantarella, the deadly poison that would later be used in the assassination of the Doge. When Marco fell to Ezio's hidden gun, Silvio responded with force, gathering an army of mercenaries under his command. He set his sights on L'Arsenal, the great Venetian shipyard. Dante led the charge, seizing control of the area, and attempted to sway local mercenaries to the Templar cause. But Ezio and his ally, Bartolomeo di Alviano, rallied their force in response. The ensuing battle was fierce. Dante, unmatched in strength, clashed with Bartolomeo and seemed on the verge of victory until Ezio intervened. Forced to retreat, Dante fled to the gates with Ezio close behind. From within the chaos, Silvio taunted Ezio, boasting of his family's crimes, mocking the death of Ezio's father and threatening his mother and sister. At last, Silvio and Dante attempted their escape, hurrying to the docks where a ship was meant to carry them to safety. But when they arrived, they found themselves abandoned. Their Templar allies, unwilling to risk their lives, had already set sail for Cyprus, leaving Silvio and Dante stranded. Cornered and out of options, the two men fought to the bitter end. Silvio Barbarigo's arrogance proved his undoing. Ezio struck him down alongside his loyal bodyguard. Even in his final moments, Silvio refused to yield any secrets, choosing to die with his pride intact. It was Dante, not Silvio, who revealed the truth, that the fleeing ship was bound for Cyprus. On July 11th, 1486, at the age of 41, Silvio Barbarigo met his end. Roderick Lansol was born on January 1st, 1431, in the town of Jatvia, within the Kingdom of Valencia, a territory of the Crown of Aragon, in what is now modern-day Spain. He was the son of Joffre Lansol y Escriva and Isabel de Borgia, his mother being a relative of the powerful Borgia family. Though his surname was originally recorded as Lansol in Valencian, his fortunes would change dramatically when his maternal uncle, Alonso de Borgia, ascended to the papacy in 1455 as Pope Calixtus III. From that moment, Roderick abandoned the Lansol name and adopted the Borgia family name, cementing his link to his uncle's rising legacy. As a young man, Rodrigo travelled to Italy to further his education. enrolling at the University of Rome before completing his degree in canon law at Bologna in 1456. The timing of his uncle's elevation to the papal throne opened doors that would have otherwise remained firmly shut. Through Calixtus III's patronage, Rodrigo rose quickly within the ranks of the Catholic Church. In rapid succession, he was granted the positions of bishop, cardinal, and ultimately vice-chancellor of the church, a role he would hold for decades. Nepotism defined the age, and Rodrigo was one of its greatest beneficiaries. His career thrived not through holiness or piety, but through the familial power of the Borgia name. He became deeply entrenched in the workings of the Roman Curia, serving under 5 popes: Calixtus III, Pius II, Paul II, Sixtus IV, and Innocent VIII. In 1458, he was inducted into the Templar order, drawn to their vision of order and domination. Ambitious and calculating, Rodrigo's rise within the Templars mirrored his climb through the church. By 1476, he had ascended to the rank of Grand Master of the Roman Rite, one of the most powerful branches of the Templars. As Grand Master, Rodrigo was no longer content to simply pull strings in Rome. His ambitions grew bolder. He envisioned the entirety of Italy unified beneath the Templar banner, its cities ruled not by independent leaders, but by loyal puppets. Every assassination, every conspiracy, and every alliance was carefully orchestrated toward that single goal, the domination of Italy. Rodrigo's charisma, political savvy, and ruthless cunning made him a formidable enemy to the assassins, and a dangerous ally to the nobles and merchants who sought his favour. His influence stretched across kingdoms, his schemes intertwined with the fates of Florence, Venice, and beyond. In December of 1476, Rodrigo Borgia orchestrated a ruthless scheme to eliminate Galeazzo Maria Sforza, the powerful Duke of Milan. The Duke had long been a target for the Templars, seen as both as a rival and an obstacle to their growing influence in Italy. Rodrigo carefully recruited and manipulated 3 Milanese nobles: Giovanni Andrea Lampugnani, Carlo Visconti, and Gerolamo Olgiati, each driven by ambition or resentment, and together they plotted to strike during the feast of Santo Stefano, when Galeazzo would appear publicly and be most vulnerable. On one night in Florence, as Rodrigo was preparing to leave the city with an escort of guards, he was intercepted by Giovanni Auditore. Rodrigo, never one to fight battles directly, immediately fled into the shadows, while Giovanni fought through his men. Concealed nearby, Rodrigo watched as Giovanni captured one of his guards and forced from him a confession: the Templars planned to assassinate Galeazzo Sforza. This revelation gave Giovanni the chance to intervene. Despite his desperate efforts, Giovanni arrived too late. The Duke of Milan was slain inside the church of Santo Stefano, and Rodrigo's plot had succeeded, sowing further chaos in the fragile balance of Italian politics. From there, Rodrigo's ambition shifted towards Venice. Giovanni, still in pursuit, discovered a Venetian ducat in the possession of Giovanni Lampugnani, tying the conspiracy to the powerful Barbarigo family. Following this lead, he uncovered an intercepted message sent from Marco and Silvio Barbarigo to their master Rodrigo. Determined to expose the Templar schemes, Giovanni carried a copied version of the letter to Rome, tasked by Lorenzo de' Medici and Uberto Alberti with discovering its true recipient. In Rome, Giovanni trailed the letter as it passed from hand to hand until finally reaching its destination: Rodrigo Borgia himself. The Templar wasted no time, hurrying into the Vatican to present it to Pope Sixtus IV. By manipulating the letter's contents, Rodrigo convinced the Pope to consider military support for the Templars' designs on Florence, further entrenching his influence within both political and spiritual spheres. Emerging from the Vatican, Rodrigo believed his plan was secure, unaware at first that Giovanni still followed him through the streets of Rome. The chase ended in St. Peter's Basilica, where Rodrigo had laid a trap. The assassin walked into the ambush, surrounded by Rodrigo's guards. Watching the slaughter of his guards, Rodrigo hurled a dagger that struck Giovanni in the chest before fleeing. Though wounded, the assassin survived, but Rodrigo had already moved to the next step of his scheme. Realizing Giovanni posed too much of a great threat to their ambitions, Rodrigo conspired with Uberto Alberti and the Pazzi family to frame him for treason. The plan was carefully executed. Giovanni and his sons, Federico and Patricio, were arrested and imprisoned in the Palazzo della Signoria, accused of plotting against Florence itself. Rodrigo stayed the night at Uberto's house, where by chance Ezio arrived with documents that could have proven his father's innocence. Ezio briefly noticed Rodrigo in the background, but unaware of his identity or importance, dismissed him and declined Alberti's invitation to remain for the night. The following morning, Rodrigo attended the trial and execution of Giovanni and his sons. Standing amidst the crowd, Ezio arrived just in time to witness the public hanging of his father and brothers. Rodrigo, cloaked in satisfaction, spotted the boy in the crowd and raised the alarm. At once, Alberti called for Ezio's arrest, but the young noble escaped. By 1478, Rodrigo Borgia's schemes intensified in Florence. Determined to remove the Medici brothers, Lorenzo the Magnificent, and his younger sibling Giuliano, Rodrigo threw his full weight behind the Pazzi family, who despised Medici dominance. Travelling to San Gimignano, Rodrigo met with Francesco, Jacopo, and Vieri de' Pazzi, where together they set the foundation of a plot that would shake the city to its core. Sensing danger, however, Rodrigo slipped away just before Mario Auditore and his nephew Ezio stormed the town with mercenaries. Not long after, Rodrigo reconvened with his conspirators. Beneath the Basilica of Santa Maria Novella, in the shadowed catacombs, the conspirators pledged themselves to the assassination. Rodrigo urged caution, warning them of assassin interference, but his parting words brimmed with confidence. Tomorrow would mark a new dawn for Florence. When the plot ended in disaster, Giuliano slain but Lorenzo surviving, Rodrigo's wrath fell swiftly. Meeting Jacopo and Emilio in San Gimignano, he turned on Jacopo, executing him with cold efficiency. With Florence stabilised under Medici rule, Rodrigo turned his attention north to Venice. In 1485, he met with Carlo Grimaldi and the Barbarigo family, orchestrating the murder of the Doge Giovanni Mocenigo so that his Templar allies could seize control of the city. Once the plan was set, Rodrigo withdrew to Rome, leaving his lieutenants to carry out the deed. By 1486, Rodrigo's gaze extended beyond Italy. Word reached him that a fellow Templar, Ottoman Prince Sem, had discovered a piece of Eden, the apple, and hidden it in Cyprus. Rodrigo dispatched an armed host to retrieve it, and 2 years later the artifact was carried back to Venice. Rodrigo prepared to claim his prize, but Ezio had already intercepted the courier, taking his place. The assassin confronted Rodrigo face to face. However, Rodrigo declared himself the prophet destined to open the fabled vault. When Ezio proved too formidable, Rodrigo summoned an elite guard to overwhelm him, slipping away in the chaos. Later that same year, Rodrigo turned to Forli, tasking the Templar lord Girolamo Riario with compiling a map that charted the scattered pages of Altair's Codex. Such knowledge would lead directly to the vault, but Riario's schemes ended abruptly when his wife Caterina Sforza betrayed him, hiring the Orsi brothers to orchestrate his death. Unaware of Caterina's hand in the affair, Rodrigo hired the Orsi himself, demanding they recover the map and, if possible, the apple. The brothers laid siege to Forli, but their campaign collapsed when Ezio defeated them, securing both the map and the apple. Yet fortune did not favour the assassins for long. The apple slipped from Ezio's grasp, falling into the possession of Girolamo Savonarola, a zealot who would rise as another enemy of Rodrigo and the Brotherhood alike. By 1491, Rodrigo's reach stretched into Spain, manipulating Tomás de Torquemada, the feared Inquisitor General and secret Templar of the Spanish Rite. Rodrigo directed purges against the assassins. Torquemada, convinced of Rodrigo's piety, obeyed his every order with unflinching zeal, never realising he was merely a pawn in the Grand Master's designs. During this same period, Rodrigo's intelligence network uncovered the ambitions of Christopher Columbus, who sought royal backing to sail west across the Atlantic. Already aware of the hidden lands beyond the ocean and the ancient treasures they harboured, Rodrigo resolved to stop him before discovery threatened Templar plans. He arranged a meeting with Columbus in Venice, laying a trap, but suspicion gnawed at Columbus's friend, Luis de Santangel, an assassin who called upon Ezio for aid. The assassin arrived in time to foil Rodrigo's plot, rescuing Columbus and ensuring that the explorer's voyage would proceed unhindered. Following the death of Pope Innocent VIII, Rodrigo Borgia moved with ruthless calculation. In the conclave of August 1492, he is said to have bribed the votes of the cardinals with gold, favours and promises of land, securing his election as Pope Alexander VI. To the world, he was now the head of the Catholic Church, but beneath the papal tiara, Rodrigo's true ambition lay elsewhere, the vault hidden beneath the Vatican, which he believed to be the dwelling place of God himself. By 1494, the death of Lorenzo de' Medici and the weakness of his son Piero created turmoil in Florence. Into this chaos stepped Savonarola, empowered by the very apple of Eden Rodrigo had once lost. Rodrigo dispatched agents and soldiers again and again to wrest the artifact from Florence, but each mission ended in failure. In 1498, Ezio slew Savonarola, shattering his hold over the city. On the 28th of December 1499, Ezio pursued Rodrigo into the Vatican itself. The assassin infiltrated the Sistine Chapel during High Mass and struck at the Pope from above. To his astonishment, Rodrigo rose unharmed, grasping the papal staff, another piece of Eden, and unleashed its devastating power. Members of the clergy were struck down by waves of force, yet Ezio endured, revealing that he too carried a relic of the first civilization. The battle that followed was unlike any other. With the apple, Ezio summoned spectral doubles of himself, overwhelming Rodrigo in combat, but the Pope, fueled by his staff, held Ezio aside and seized the apple. Combining the two artifacts, Rodrigo opened the passage to the vault. Wounded but unbroken, Ezio rose again and followed Rodrigo into the vault. There he found the Pope raging in frustration, pounding upon the sealed doors, which refused to admit him. Ezio descended into the chamber and challenged Rodrigo to abandon relics, guards, and subterfuge, to fight him man to man. In the brutal struggle that followed, Ezio bested him. Broken and disbelieving, Rodrigo confessed the truth. He had never been a man of faith, nor did he believe in God. He had donned the robes of the papacy for one reason only: to claim the staff and the vault, to stand as prophet of a new world. Ezio denied him this, telling him that he was no prophet, had never been, and never would be. The words struck Rodrigo harder than any blade. Defeated in body and spirit, he begged Ezio to kill him. But Ezio refused. He declared that no death could restore his murdered kin, and that leaving Rodrigo alive with the knowledge of his failure was punishment enough. To be denied both faith and destiny, to live as nothing but a broken fraud, that was a fate far crueler than death. Rodrigo's fall was swift thereafter. His son Cesare, consumed with his own ambition, launched a siege on Monteregione without his father's approval, seeking the apple and the extermination of the assassins. From then on, Rodrigo was reduced to a mere figurehead, stripped of authority, while Cesare Borgia took control of Rome and the Templar cause. Following the debacle beneath the Vatican, misfortune seemed to stalk Rodrigo's every step. In June of 1500, an iron steeple from St. Peter's Basilica came crashing down, striking the earth mere feet from where he walked. The very next day, a chamber of the Vatican collapsed, killing all inside, except for Rodrigo, spared by a canopy that caught the falling stones above him. Weeks later, fever racked his body, and before the year was out, he was nearly gored to death by a stag on a hunting excursion. In 1503, Rodrigo sought to reclaim control through other means. He entrusted the Apple of Eden to his grandson, Giovanni, the illegitimate child of Lucrezia, hoping that the boy might succeed where his elders had failed. However, Cesare remained the greater threat. By August of that year, Rodrigo's patience had reached its end. At the notorious party hosted by his nephew, Rodrigo reprimanded Cesare, only to be dismissed with scorn. Cesare reminded him that it was he, not the Pope, who commanded armies and men. This arrogance, combined with his reckless ambition, convinced Rodrigo that his son had to be stopped. Rodrigo stole from Lucrezia's private stores of Cantarella a deadly poison and laced a selection of apples with the substance. His intent was simple: to remove Cesare quietly, but fate as ever betrayed him. In his private chambers, Rodrigo received Cesare, who demanded to know what had become of his funds and his army. The Pope stalled at first, but then revealed that his allies had been slain by the assassins. Soon after, Lucrezia burst into the chambers as she had discovered her poison supply missing and feared what her father intended. Her warning came too late though. Cesare had already bitten into one of the apples, spitting it out onto the floor. Enraged beyond measure, he seized his father, forcing the poisoned fruit into his throat. The Pope clawed at his son, but the poison did its work swiftly. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, Grand Master of the Templars, died choking on his own ambition on the 18th of August 1503 at the age of 72. Ezio arrived moments after the act. Finding that his enemy was already defeated, he knelt beside him and gave him his last rites, a mercy Rodrigo had never offered his own countless victims. Juan Borgia the Elder was born in 1446 and was one of Cesare Borgia's 3 generals and a prominent figure in Rome during the reign of Pope Alexander VI. He was known as the Banker. He managed Cesare's military finances and supported the Borgia campaigns to bring Italy under Templar control. Despite this role, the Banker was infamous for spending vast sums on extravagant and often scandalously indulgent public festivities. The first of Rodrigo Borgia's 10 nephews to be elevated to the cardinalship, the Banker quickly secured a privileged place within the Borgia court. In 1499, he assisted Cesare in forging an alliance with Octavian de Valois, impressing the young Captain General with his refined knowledge of French culture. Cesare eventually entrusted him with Rome's financial administration. The Banker, however, funneled much of the city's tax revenue into funding his own opulent celebrations. On January 2nd, 1500, the Banker joined his cousins, Cesare and Lucrezia, along with his fellow Templars Octavian and Micheletto, in the siege of Monteregione. Once the gates were breached, the attackers swept into the city, with the Banker taking Caterina Sforza captive. In June of 1501, the Banker, Cesare, Octavian and Micheletto met briefly in the stable courtyard of Castel Sant'Angelo. Before departing for his campaign against Urbino, Cesare instructed them to humour his father's tired old men's club for the time being, but to never forget where their true loyalties lay. With that, Cesare entrusted control of Rome to his generals. By 1503, Ezio realised that dismantling the Borgia Empire would require cutting off Cesare's financial resources, and that meant finding and eliminating the banker. Yet the banker's identity was carefully hidden, a closely guarded secret within the Borgia ranks. Ezio eventually uncovered a lead through his sister Claudia, who pointed him toward Egidio Troche, a Roman senator deeply indebted to the banker. After rescuing Egidio from a Borgia ambush and providing him with enough money to pay off his debts, Ezio learned that the banker planned to attend an opulent pagan-themed celebration, giving the assassin the opening he needed. On August 1st, 1503, Ezio shadowed Egidio as he delivered his debt payment to the Pantheon. Once there, the banker's guards counted the money before preparing to transport it to him at the festivities. Ezio scaled the Great Monument, intercepted the escort, and assassinated their captain, Luigi Torcelli. Disguising himself in Luigi's uniform, Ezio carried the chest of money to the lavish pagan-themed celebration hosted by the banker. Once inside, he discreetly followed the courier until he was finally led to the man himself. The banker revealed his identity when he introduced himself to a courtesan, unknowingly exposing the target Ezio had been hunting. As he strolled through the gathering with the courtesan on his arms, he boasted of his hunger for power, claiming that even plucking an apple from a tree filled him with a sense of superiority. Soon, the company arrived at the heart of the party, where Cesare addressed the crowd with a speech on a soon-to-be united Italy, before declaring the festivities open. After a tense exchange between the Pope and Cesare, both men departed, leaving Ezio to focus on his quarry. In a disturbing display of dominance, the banker strangled the courtesan beside him and moved into the crowd, flanked by his bodyguards. Despite the heavy protection, Ezio slipped among the revelers and waited patiently from a bench along the banker's path. When the moment came, Ezio struck swiftly, ending the banker's life with a hidden blade. With his final breath, he expressed no remorse, insisting that he had no regrets for the life of indulgence that he lived. Ezio answered that true strength lies in resisting mortal temptations, to which the banker retorted that he had simply given the people what they desired. The banker died on the 1st of August 1503 at the age of 57. Little is known of Octavian's early life, beyond the fact that he was born around 1448. In 1498, his distant cousin, Louis XII, ascended to the French throne, and soon after, Louis appointed Octavian to lead his Italian campaign, despite his cousin's lack of battlefield experience and reliance solely on formal training. The following year, Octavian met Cesare and the banker at the French court, where the brothers were arranging Cesare's marriage to Charlotte d'Aubray. After spending a month in their company, Octavian accompanied the Borgias to Italy, under the impression that he would be rewarded with dominion once their enemies were subdued. Just like the other Templars, Octavian took part in the siege of Monteregione. Later that same year, he convened with Cesare at the stables of Castel Sant'Angelo. There Cesare entrusted the city to his 3 generals before departing for Urbino. When Octavian pressed him about the Vatican, Cesare dismissed his concerns, assuring him that soon they would have no need of it. Following this, Octavian stationed several of his men at the Castello to strengthen its defences. In 1503, Ezio decided that Octavian had to be eliminated if Cesare was to lose the support and protection of the French army. After assassinating the banker on August 1st, Ezio turned to his ally Bartolomeo, leader of the Roman mercenaries who was actively resisting Octavian's advancing forces. The French soon launched an assault on Bartolomeo's barracks, but Ezio and the mercenaries successfully repelled the attack. Octavian moved to the front lines himself and called out for Bartolomeo. From behind the stronghold gates, Bartolomeo listened as Octavian demanded for his unconditional surrender. The two traded insults until Octavian once again demanded surrender by sunrise. To force Bartolomeo's compliance, he revealed that his men had captured Pantasilea Baglioni, who happened to be Bartolomeo's wife. As he departed, Octavian promised her release, only if Bartolomeo entered the French camp unarmed and alone. Unwilling to submit, Ezio and Bartolomeo devised a counterplan. They would steal the armour of French soldiers, infiltrate the camp in disguise, and present Bartolomeo as a prisoner. With the help of several mercenaries, they successfully executed the ruse, and at last confronted Octavian face to face. With Pantasilea by his side, Octavian greeted Bartolomeo with mockery, as the two began to again trade insults. This ended when Octavian raised his pistol to Pantasilea's head. At that moment, Ezio fired his hidden gun into the air, startling Octavian and signalling the mercenaries to strike. Chaos erupted as Octavian fled deeper into the camp with Pantasilea in tow, while papal guards and French troops fought desperately to cover his retreat. Ezio, Bartolomeo and the mercenaries clashed with the French in a furious battle, but Ezio quickly broke away to pursue Octavian himself. In the main courtyard, Octavian turned and fired, narrowly missing Ezio, before dragging Pantasilea behind the protection of his gunmen. He started to shout threats, warning that if he even sensed Ezio's presence, he would kill her. Undeterred, Ezio moved unseen, closing in from above, With precision, he struck, assassinating Octavian before he could act. As he lay dying, Octavian confessed that all he ever wanted was respect, but Ezio replied saying that respect is earned, never inherited or bought. With those words, the Baron recognised his folly, closed his eyes and received Ezio's final blessings before passing into silence sometime in August of 1503 at the age of around 55. Micheletto was born sometime in 1470 in Valencia, Spain, but moved to Rome at a young age. There he formed a close bond with Cesare, serving as his protector even in boyhood. The two grew up side by side, and Micheletto's connection to Cesare, son of one of the most powerful men in Rome, secured him a privileged place within the Borgia circle. Their loyalty to one another never wavered, and together they matured into men who would help bring Rome under Borgia control through sheer force. Remaining by Cesare's side, Micheletto became his trusted bodyguard and personal assassin. He mastered the strangling cord, refining it into his signature method of execution. Though he was said to know more than 150 different ways to kill a man, his ruthless efficiency made him indispensable. Over time, Micheletto rose to become Cesare's most faithful servant, often acting as the executioner for those who defied his master. His unwavering service earned him the role of Cesare's right-hand man, though he remained bound to the Borgia family as a whole. During this period, he also became a military leader and briefly served as governor of Piombino. He also accompanied his allies in the siege of Monteregione. Many of Micheletto's murders were left unrecorded, though whispers of his deeds lingered over the years. On the 18th of August 1500, Micheletto struck down Alfonso of Aragon, husband of Lucrezia Borgia, on Cesare's orders. In 1502, he eliminated Giulio di Verano, along with 3 of his sons, clearing the way for Cesare to seize Camerino. Just months later, on the 9th of June, he murdered Astore Manfredi. On the 31st of December 1502, Cesare orchestrated a grim betrayal. Summoning the leading captains who had once deserted his ranks, he feigned reconciliation and invited them back into his service. But the gathering turned to treachery. 2 of the captains, Oliver Rotto de Fermo and Vitellozzo Vitelli, were strangled side by side by Micheletto's hand. Between 1500 and 1503, Micheletto was occasionally tasked with guarding and training Giovanni Borgia, Cesare's adopted son and the biological child of Lucrezia. His methods, however, were harsh and merciless, believing brutality was the path to strength. Micheletto often beat Giovanni in an effort to harden him and force him to learn self-defense. On one occasion, he brought the boy into the city and ordered him to strike up a conversation with an old man. As Giovanni distracted the victim, Micheletto crept up from behind and strangled the man to death, an act meant to expose the boy to the cruelties of the world. These lessons only bred resentment. Giovanni came to despise Micheletto and in time fled from home altogether. In August of 1503, shortly after the death of Octavian, Micheletto accompanied Cesare to a meeting with Francesco Troche. Francesco had betrayed Cesare's plans for Romagna by confiding in his brother Egidio, who then attempted to warn the Venetian ambassador. The letters, however, were intercepted, sealing Francesco's fate. Though he begged Cesare for mercy, Micheletto strangled him on his master's orders and cast his body into the Tiber. Soon after, Micheletto met with a group of Borgia guards, equipping them with costumes that would allow them to infiltrate a performance at the Colosseum and assassinate Pietro Rossi, Lucrezia's new lover. What Micheletto did not know was that Ezio was already tracking him. Ezio dispatched his apprentices to eliminate the guards and claim their disguises for themselves. Ezio then shadowed Micheletto to the Colosseum, where he silently disposed of the Borgia gunmen stationed throughout the theatre. Donning a costume of his own, Ezio followed Micheletto onto the stage, blending into the play alongside him. The moment Micheletto drew near, Ezio struck with his hidden blade. Micheletto confessed that Pietro's vinegar had already been poisoned as a contingency, and taunted Ezio that he would be too late to intervene. Yet Ezio chose not to kill him. Instead, he spared Micheletto, warning that his blind devotion to Cesare would ultimately bring about his own destruction. Cesare eventually turned on his own father, killing him after the Pope attempted to poison him. The death of Alexander VI shattered the Borgia's grip on Rome, leaving Cesare weakened and stripped of power. In desperation, he ordered Micheletto to raise an army and reclaim the city, but Micheletto never succeeded. Before his forces could be mustered, Cesare was captured by the Papal Guard under the command of the new Pope, Julius II. With his master imprisoned, Micheletto abandoned Rome. In the months that followed, Micheletto drifted from place to place before taking refuge in Zagarolo. There, the assassins tracked him down and confronted him with a small battalion. Though Micheletto and his men fought fiercely, they were overwhelmed and defeated. Micheletto was taken prisoner and then was transported to Florence and locked within the Palazzo della Signoria. He was interrogated by Machiavelli, Piero Soderini, and Amerigo Vespucci, and despite the torture, he refused to betray any secrets. His silence sealed his fate and he was sentenced to death. Yet on the eve of his execution, salvation came. A group of Borgia loyalists infiltrated the prison, one disguised as a priest. Slipping Micheletto a file, they enabled him to saw through the bars of his cell and make his escape. After escaping from prison, Micheletto fled to Valencia, where he and his followers took refuge at the Lone Wolf Inn. They quickly turned the inn into their base of operations, but their presence didn't go unnoticed. Ezio and Machiavelli confronted them there, and after a fierce skirmish in which most of Micheletto's men were slain, he was forced to flee. Determined to reunite with his master, Micheletto made his way to the Castillo della Motta, where Cesare Borgia was being held captive. With a carefully devised plan, Micheletto and his remaining followers managed to break Cesare free from his cell. Together the two returned to Valencia, where Cesare began the work of rallying his forces once more. Soon after, Micheletto met with his master at their headquarters in the Lone Wolf Inn. As Cesare outlined his next ambitions, Micheletto pledged his loyalty and promised to aid his conquests. But Cesare dismissed him coldly, declaring that Micheletto had failed. Enraged by this, Micheletto leapt across the table, attempting to strangle his master with his bare hands. Cesare, though, was faster and more ruthless. He drew a pistol and shot him in the head, ending his life in 1506 at the age of 36. Ironically, Ezio's earlier words proved true. In serving Cesare, Micheletto had orchestrated his own downfall. Cesare Borgia was born on the 13th of September 1475 in Rome. He was the son of Rodrigo Borgia and his longtime mistress, Venoza di Catanei. At the age of 18, Cesare was appointed as cardinal, while his elder brother, Juan the Younger, not to be confused with the banker, assumed the role of captain general. Dissatisfied with life in the clergy and envious of his brother's power, Cesare lured his brother to Tiber Island. There he arranged for him to spend the night with the courtesan Fiora Cavazza, who murdered him under Cesare's orders. With his brother eliminated, Cesare seized his brother's position as captain general, establishing himself as one of the most influential men in Italy. He surrounded himself with brutal and efficient allies, such as Ramiro di Orco, Oliver Rotto de Fermo, and Vitellozzo Vitelli. In 1496, when Rodrigo launched a campaign against the Orsini family to claim their lands north of Rome, Cesare joined the fighting. Among the Orsini ranks was Bartolomeo di Alviano. As Bartolomeo's defences dwindled to 3 remaining fortresses, Cesare cut off his supplies, seemingly ensuring victory. But Carlo Orsini soon reinforced him with fresh troops, striking a decisive blow that left Cesare wounded across the face. 2 years later, in 1498, Cesare's sister Lucrezia entered into a secret relationship with the assassin Perotto Calderon, which resulted in her pregnancy. Outraged by this, Cesare imprisoned Perotto and claimed the child for himself, naming the boy Giovanni Borgia. By 1499, Cesare began laying the foundations for a force that could counter the assassins directly. He sent a group of orphans to Vallombrosa Abbey and deceived the veteran assassin Rafael Sanchez into training them for 5 years, preparing them as killers. From these recruits, Cesare formed his own order called the Crows, placing his ally Sirius Favero at their head. Yet tensions soon arose between the two men over the group's purpose and ideology, friction that would only grow in the years to come. In December of 1499, after Rodrigo Borgia's defeat at the hands of Ezio, Cesare learned from his father that the assassin now held an Apple of Eden. Obsessed with seizing the artifact's power and determined to crush the Brotherhood once and for all, Cesare launched a massive assault on Monteriggioni, the assassin's stronghold, on the 2nd of January 1500. The siege was devastating. Cesare's army stormed the fortress, overwhelming its defenders. By the end of the battle, the Borgia had captured the Apple, the formidable Caterina Sforza, and Mario Auditore, mentor of the Italian Brotherhood. Mario was dragged through the gates, collapsing to the ground as Cesare entered the ruined city with his entourage. As Ezio watched from the rooftops, racing to aid his uncle, Cesare seized Octavian's pistol, declaring that too much blood had already been spilled. Then with cold finality, he raised the pistol and executed Mario with a single shot. Cesare immediately ordered Mario's decapitation, mounting his head on a pike as a brutal warning. When Ezio attempted to flee the burning city, Cesare taunted him, brandishing Mario's head and vowing that death would soon follow. In the aftermath, Cesare entrusted the Templar Pietro di Galencia with a secret mission: infiltrate Monteriggioni and steal a chest hidden within Villa Auditore. The chest's contents, blueprints for the hidden blade, were handed to the weaponsmith Demetrio, who was then ordered to forge new weapons for the Crows, the so-called Corvix blades. Backed by both the Pope and the King of France, Cesare began carving out his own dominion in central Italy. After the sack of Monteriggioni, Cesare deployed his generals Ramiro di Orco, Vitellozzo Vitelli, and Oliver Rotto de Fermo to claim Romagna for the Borgia. But ambition turned to treachery when the 3 men rebelled. Cesare struck first, brutally executing Ramiro to set an example. His death sent shockwaves through the ranks, and Vitellozzo and Oliverotto were quick to beg for forgiveness, which Cesare granted, at least on the surface. With Romagna secured and their usefulness spent, Cesare lured the two generals to a banquet held in their honour. Greeting them warmly, he thanked them for their service and declared it was time to shed his bloody gloves. Then, as papal guards closed in, the trap was sprung. Though Vitellozzo and Oliverotto fought ferociously and even managed to cut down their attackers, Cesare armed himself with a crossbow. As Vitellozzo faltered from his wounds, Cesare fired a bolt into Oliverotto's chest. Hours later, the two regained consciousness, only to find themselves chained back to back. Before them stood Cesare, flanked by Micheletto. As Oliverotto raged at Vitellozzo for leading him into disaster, Cesare dismissed their quarrel as meaningless. He then ordered Micheletto to strangle them together, back to back, remarking that their sacrifice had been invaluable to his cause. In late 1501, Ezio infiltrated the Castel Sant'Angelo and saw Cesare in the stables. Later, Cesare shared a private moment with his sister Lucrezia, asking whether their father had approved the funds requested by his banker. When she revealed that Rodrigo was absent and might need persuasion, Cesare pressed no further. Soon after, he departed for Romagna to continue his relentless campaign. In 1502, Cesare turned his attention to Fiora Cavazza, who was once counted among his allies. He invited her to dinner under the guise of courtesy, but his true aim was interrogation. He sought answers regarding the mysterious deaths of his agents, Il Lupo and Baltasar da Silva. Fiora denied any involvement, but Cesare remained unconvinced. That same night, his adopted son Giovanni caught her attempting to steal the Apple of Eden. Alarmed by the commotion, Cesare entered the chamber to find Fiora paralysed by the apple's power. Advancing on her with calculated calm, he told Giovanni that he intended to hurt her, his voice steady, cold, and without a trace of mercy. In August 1503, Cesare attended the banker's infamous pagan celebration, where he delivered a fiery speech envisioning a soon-to-be united Italy. After declaring the festivities open, he was interrupted by Rodrigo, who reminded him that no such agreement to conquer Italy had ever been made. Cesare, however, dismissed his father's protest, asserting that he now held true authority, even if not officially, and urged Rodrigo simply to enjoy the evening. Later that month, Cesare discovered that his confidant, Francesco Trochet, had revealed his plans for Romagna to his brother. Without hesitation, Cesare ordered Micheletto to execute Trochet, and soon after, Micheletto was commanded to eliminate Pietro Rossi, the actor and Lucrezia's secret lover, further tightening Cesare's control through violence. By the 18th of August, the tide had shifted. Interference from the Italian assassins had drained Cesare's coffers and crippled his forces. Furious by this, he stormed into Rodrigo's private chambers, demanding answers. Rodrigo accused Cesare of being insatiable despite everything he had been given, while Cesare accused his father of weakness and demanded the Apple of Eden. Rodrigo's refusal only stoked Cesare's wrath. At that moment, Lucrezia burst into the room and warned her brother that their father had plotted to poison him with a bowl of apples left on the table. Consumed by rage and betrayal, Cesare seized the poisoned fruit and rammed it down Rodrigo's throat, forcing his father to choke on the weapon meant for him. With Rodrigo dead, Cesare turned on Lucrezia, demanding the apple's location. Under immense pressure, she confessed, revealing its hiding place, and yet Cesare's triumph was short-lived. Ezio managed to reach the St. Peter's Basilica first, claiming the piece of Eden before the Captain General could even lay hands on it. From that point on, Cesare's rule unravelled. The poison meant for Rodrigo had seeped into his own body, leaving the Captain General weakened for months. As he struggled to recover, the assassins seized the Apple of Eden and steadily dismantled his forces. The cardinals of the Curia, once allies, turned against him, condemning Borgia wealth as tainted and withholding their support. Now desperate, Cesare dispatched Micheletto to rally his armies from the north in hopes of reclaiming Rome. But while he waited for their return, the highest-ranking assassins descended upon him. One by one, his remaining followers were cut down until Fabio Orsini arrived with the papal guard, bearing a warrant for Cesare's arrest signed by the newly elected Pope Julius II. The mighty Captain General was seized and imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo. Though confined, Cesare's defiance did not waver. He soon escaped and fled to Florence, where he sought vengeance against Demetrio, the weaponsmith who had once forged his Corvix blades. After Cesare mutilated him by cutting out his tongue, Demetrio refused to serve further and plotted against his former master. Cesare tracked him down to execute him, but the assassins intervened. Amidst this chaos, Cesare's alliance with Sirius Favero and the Crows disintegrated. Declaring them traitors to the Templar cause, Cesare severed ties, while Sirius in turn swore vengeance. Eventually, Cesare was recaptured. Pope Julius II, wary of his influence and resilience, ordered him transferred to a stronger prison far from Rome. the formidable Castillo de la Mota in Spain, but Cesare's exact location remained hidden. Unaware of where he had been taken, Ezio joined forces with Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci in order to track him down, while Micheletto, still free and fiercely loyal, began plotting his master's escape. In 1506, Cesare escaped captivity at the Castillo with a bribed guard's help. A rope was smuggled into his cell, and disguised in a stolen uniform, he climbed down from his window, slipped past the gates, and reunited with his ever-loyal enforcer. Micheletto warned him that Ezio was on his trail, but Cesare brushed off the threat. Once in Valencia, Cesare set about rebuilding his shattered power. Volunteers flocked to his banner, and a sprawling encampment grew under his command. From the Lone Wolf Inn, Cesare spent his days drafting military strategies, determined to carve a new future. But the assassins were watching. Ezio and Machiavelli struck first, destroying the encampment and 12 ships with Leonardo's devastating bombs. From the rooftop of the Lone Wolf Inn, the assassins spied as Cesare's fury turned inward. He lashed out at Micheletto, blaming him for the setback and spitting venomous insults, calling him nothing more than a dog fit to die in the gutter. In his arrogance, Cesare announced his intention to seek support from his brother-in-law, King John III of Navarre. Micheletto pleaded for forgiveness, reminding Cesare of his years of loyal service, but Cesare's scorn only deepened. Pushed past breaking, Micheletto finally turned on his master, leaping across the table to strangle him, yet Cesare was faster. From above, Ezio and Machiavelli witnessed the betrayal. When their own movement betrayed them, Cesare fired into the shadows, his bullet striking Machiavelli in the shoulder. Ezio rushed to save his wounded ally, choosing loyalty over vengeance, and so Cesare seized the opportunity to escape once more, fleeing Valencia and vanishing across the border into the Kingdom of Navarre. In March of 1507, Cesare sought to reclaim his shattered honour by seizing command of King John III's army during the siege of Vienna. Victory, he believed, would restore French support and return him to power, yet fate had other plans. Ezio, having learned of Cesare's involvement, set his sights on Vienna to end the Templar once and for all. Amidst the chaos of battle, Ezio confronted Cesare on the field. However, cannon fire struck nearby, stunning Ezio and scattering the troops, but the assassin pressed forward. Ezio finally cornered him atop Vienna's ramparts, where Cesare fought with both sword and pistol. After a brutal duel, the assassin pinned him to the ground. Defiant to the end, Cesare swore that no mortal man could kill him, and Ezio's response was resolute. He would leave Cesare to the judgment of fate. With that, he hurled the Captain General from the castle walls, and so Cesare Borgia fell to his death on the 12th of March 1507, ending his reign of blood and ambition at the age of 31. The earliest thing we know about Fiora was that in 1497 she lived and worked as a courtesan in the Rosa in Fiore brothel, which is in Rome, under the management of Madonna Solari, but life within the walls never satisfied her. Ambitious and determined, Fiora hoped to win the favour of influential clients, enough that one of them might one day grant her a way out. She often slipped beyond the brothel to gather information and cultivate allies, a habit that earned her both admiration and jealousy from the other girls. Among her acquaintances was Brother Ristoro, a former patron who insisted on speaking with her often. Fiora enjoyed his company despite finding both him and his perversions repulsive. During her time there, Fiora and another courtesan, Lucia, were sent to escort Solari's brother, Santino. The assignment quickly turned grim. Santino treated them with cruelty, and Fiora could tell that whatever shady dealings he was involved in, they were beginning to fall apart. Not long after, a new client arrived at the Rosa in Fiore, Cesare Borgia. Charming, enigmatic, and unlike any man who had came before, Fiora was instantly drawn to him. She assumed he had come to hire her, but Cesare soon clarified otherwise. Santino had already been punished for meddling in business beyond his reach, and to spare both his and Solari's lives, they had allowed Cesare to claim one courtesan of his choosing. He chose Fiora. From 1497 to 1502, Fiora served Cesare Borgia with unwavering loyalty, posing as a courtesan while living under his protection. In her very first year in his employ, Cesare ordered her to seduce and assassinate his brother Juan on Tiber Island, clearing the way for Cesare to claim the title of Captain General. Over time, Fiora not only managed many of his Templar agents, but eventually began recruiting them herself. One of the first agents that she worked with was Brother Ristoro, the same corrupt clergyman who once frequented the Rosa in Fiore. He provided Cesare with religious relics and forged letters for distribution as needed. Another loyal supplier was Lea de Russo, a smuggler who trafficked in everything from worthless trinkets to priceless antiquities. Fiora also came to know Auguste Oberlin, Cesare's personal blacksmith. Acting as a messenger between them, she often delivered Cesare's requests for weapons and supplies. Auguste complied, though his wife clearly resented the arrangement. Fiora watched as their marriage gradually unravelled, noting how the couple would growl at each other like wild dogs whenever she departed. In 1502, Fiora visited Gaspard de la Croix, Cesare's engineer. She found him alone in his house, singing a sorrowful French tune, and hesitated before making her presence known. To her, he seemed a man burdened by ghosts. His questions about death unsettled her, and when she prepared to leave, he refused any payment. As she walked out, she noticed him quietly adjusting an arquebus, its barrel aimed deliberately at the people passing beyond his window. From then on, Fiora chose her path past the house with great caution. In time, Fiora was charged with expanding Cesare's underground army, a group she referred to as his personal collection of misfits. The first recruit on her list was Rocco Tiepolo, a seasoned captain from whom she was to secure the finest mercenaries available. She was then tasked with bribing Donato Mancini, renowned as Cesare's best horseman, to intentionally lose a race scheduled for that day. Donato, however, remained unmoved by Fiora's bribes and threats. Even after Cesare dispatched an officer to sabotage him, Donato still won the race. Next, Fiora met with the Cento Oci, a band of thieves led by a young man named Lanz, whom Cesare suspected of robbing one of the Borgia carriages. Rather than punish them, Fiora negotiated a deal. Lanz would return the stolen money, and in exchange, his gang would enter Cesare's service. Cesare later paired Fiora with Baltasar da Silva to observe one of their greatest enemies, the Order of Assassins. Together they witnessed one of Cesare's senators being slain in broad daylight. Though Fiora felt humiliated when the assassin escaped, Baltasar remained optimistic, intrigued by the glimpse they'd gained of their weapons and tactics. Fiora's next assignment brought her into the company of Cahin and Cahar, a brother and sister duo of harlequins. She found them totally mad yet fun. The three of them proceeded to massacre a group of onlookers who had gathered to watch the siblings perform. She then met Il Carnifice, a sadistic executioner who revelled in the brutality of his work. Fiora considered him more revolting than fearsome, but still she served as a messenger between him and Cesare, delivering instructions whenever needed. Her final task in this string of errands was to approach Silvestro Sabatini. Fiora offered him a second chance in Cesare's service, presenting a prosthetic arm forged by Gaspar. At first, Silvestro scoffed at the gift, demanding jewels and rare metals to embellish it, but when Fiora casually threatened to take it back to Cesare, he snatched it from her and strapped it on without another word. Cesare's final assignment for Fiora was perhaps his most disturbing. She was to make contact with Malfatto, a deranged doctor notorious for butchering the courtesans of Rome. The task terrified her, not only because of his reputation, but because she herself had once been a courtesan. Still, Cesare insisted she deliver a letter of absolution to earn his allegiance. Her first attempt to track him down ended in horror. She found only his most recent victim sprawled in a pool of blood. On her second attempt, Fiora dressed once more in her old courtesan attire, hoping to draw him out. When Malfatto finally appeared, he lunged straight at her, but she managed to hold him by shouting Cesare's name and thrusting the letter into his hands. That night, Fiora returned to the house Cesare had gifted her, but sleep would not come. In the dead of night, she felt a sharp sting at her neck. Startled, she reached up, not to swat a bug, but to find Malfatto pressing a syringe into her skin. The drug took hold quickly, but not before Fiora slashed him with her metal fan. She blacked out soon after. When she awoke, Malfatto was gone, but something in her had changed. Her loyalty to Cesare had fractured. She resolved to betray him. Fiora then compiled a list of Cesare's most trusted agents, the same ones she had carefully recruited, and sent it to the assassins. To her surprise, the one sent to retrieve her was none other than the young painter Francesco Vecellio. Fiora joined forces with the assassins and helped eliminate the very agents she had once recruited. The first to fall was Rocco Tiepolo. She later assisted in the deaths, or at least the downfalls, of Cahin and Cahar, Baltasar da Silva, and finally Il Lupo. Once her vengeance against the Templar agents was complete, Fiora answered a summons from Cesare Borgia. When she arrived, she caught the eye of his presumed son, Giovanni. Later, Fiora and Cesare shared a quiet dinner, but their civility barely masked a deep mutual distrust. Cesare pressed her about the sudden disappearance of his allies and her rumoured dealings with the assassins, but Fiora denied everything. Later that night, Giovanni spotted her sneaking through the house in search of the hidden Apple of Eden. Mistaking her mission for play, he grabbed the artifact and darted away, gleefully challenging her to chase him. Fiora panicked as she tried to retrieve the piece of Eden, but its power froze her in place. Awakened by the commotion, Cesare approached the immobilized Fiora. When Giovanni asked Cesare if he intended to hurt her, Cesare answered calmly that he would. Her fate, it seemed, was sealed. Baltasar de Silva served as Cesare Borgia's master spy and was a devoted member of the Templar Order. Though he posed as a humble barber, his true occupation was gathering intelligence for the Borgias, particularly on their greatest rivals, the Assassins. At one point, Baltasar partnered with Fiora Cavazza to study the Assassins more closely. Their method was bold. They used one of Cesare's senators as bait, a notoriously corrupt man who had already survived a previous assassination attempt. For several days, Baltasar and Fiora shadowed him in secret, waiting for the assassins to strike. They witnessed the senator's assassination firsthand and attempted to pursue the assassin afterward, but were unable to keep pace. Even so, Baltasar considered the mission a success. He carefully observed the assassin's movements, attire, and weapons, especially the hidden blade, and took detailed notes. He continued collecting intelligence in the days that followed, reporting everything directly to Fiora. Eventually, their research inspired a daring experiment. Baltasar and Fiora set out to manufacture an assassin of their own. To that end, they trained Il Lupo to imitate assassin techniques, teaching him to replicate both their combat style and weaponry. When Fiora betrayed Cesare and joined the assassins in 1503, she quickly realised that Baltasar posed a serious threat. He knew too much about her work with the Templars and about what she had shared with her new allies. To protect herself and cover her tracks, she convinced the assassins to target him after eliminating other Templar targets. The assassins initially planned to strike at Baltasar's barbershop, but Fiora warned them it was a decoy. Instead, she led them to his true hideout. Unfortunately, Baltasar had anticipated this. The entrance was rigged with traps. A tripwire triggered explosion at the doorway and a mannequin packed with abrasive powder, which injured one of the assassins when struck with a throwing knife. As they searched the hideout, Fiora spotted Baltasar outside with a torch in his hand. He froze when he recognised her. Moments later though, he set the building ablaze and the assassins escaped before the flames consumed it. But Baltasar vanished into the night. When Fiora later returned to the ruins of his hideout, she found a letter from him. He proposed a meeting at a nearby warehouse, promising a better deal. Fiora scouted the location carefully and entered to find Baltasar waiting alone at a table. He calmly analysed her motives for turning against Cesare, most of which were correct, and assured her he had not yet reported her treachery. Then he apologised and revealed that it was a trap. Hidden riflemen emerged from the shadows at his signal, but before they could fire, a volley of arrows cut them down. Fiora's assassin allies had followed her, and this time she was the one being rescued. Auguste Oberlin served as Cesare Borgia's personal blacksmith and was a devoted member of the Templar Order. He supplied weapons to many of Cesare's agents and was also responsible for designing and distributing Borgia propaganda throughout Rome. Born in Switzerland in 1468, Auguste began his adult life as a mercenary. After relocating to Rome, he first found work among the common folk, crafting shop signs for merchants. But his talent soon caught the attention of the Borgia, who recruited him into their service. Despite his imposing, rough exterior, Auguste was both an artist and an intellectual. He forged blades with precision and sketched propaganda posters with the eye of a perfectionist, often revising his designs multiple times before allowing them to be seen. Beyond traditional weaponry, Auguste also fulfilled Cesare's more unconventional requests, devices imagined by Borgia engineers and inventors. These orders were typically delivered by Fiora Cavazza. Auguste complied, though his wife openly resented Fiora's frequent visits. Their marriage deteriorated rapidly. During one of Fiora's visits, the couple erupted into a vicious argument, prompting Fiora to quietly take her leave. By 1503, their conflicts turned violent. Auguste struck his wife and then barricaded himself in his workshop, leaving her weeping outside their home in the Campagna district. It was there that Ezio found her. She explained the situation and urged him to destroy Auguste's propaganda posters, knowing that her husband's pride would force him to respond. Ezio complied. Enraged, Auguste emerged with several Borgia guards. The assassin dispatched the soldiers with ease, then ended Auguste's life at the age of 35 with a strike of the hidden blade. Donato Mancini, born in 1473, served as a military captain in the Papal army under Borgia command and was a member of the Templar Order. Known for his confidence and exceptional skill on horseback, he was frequently favoured by Cesare Borgia. In 1502, during a private horse race hosted by the Borgia, Fiora Cavazza was sent to persuade Donato, through bribery or intimidation, to let Cesare win. She presented him with an ornate set of armour, which he gladly tried on. Yet when she delivered Cesare's threat, Donato only smirked and replied, "The winner will win the race. There are no other factors." True to his word, Donato rode honourably and skillfully, even when Cesare's officer, Teodoro Viscardi, attempted to sabotage him mid-race with a blade. Donato evaded the attack and charged ahead, winning before a speechless audience. In accordance with her orders, Fiora directed a group of mercenaries to beat Donato in retaliation, a spectacle the crowd enjoyed. though she privately admired him as the race's rightful victor. The following year, Donato lost a race to a merchant named Rocco. Instead of accepting defeat with dignity, he lashed out, destroying the merchant's stand and threatening to kill him. Ezio encountered the shaken merchant soon after and decided to intervene. Tracking Donato to the ruins of the Circus Maximus, Ezio found him training alongside his soldiers. The assassin gave chase, targeting Donato alone and killing him at the age of 30. Though Donato had once defied Cesare's manipulation and won through merit, he ultimately mirrored Cesare's own arrogance when faced with defeat. Perhaps the humiliation inflicted upon him in that earlier race had left a deeper scar than he cared to admit. Malfatto was a notorious serial killer of courtesans in Rome, feared widely enough to draw the attention of Cesare Borgia himself. Rather than having him executed, Cesare sought to recruit the murderous doctor into his personal ranks. In 1502, he sent his envoy, Fiora Cavazza, to deliver a letter of absolution as an invitation. Having once been a courtesan herself, Fiora was deeply unsettled by the assignment, but she obeyed. On her first attempt to track him down, Fiora wandered through one of the Rome's poorer districts. Instead of finding Malfatto, she heard the desperate cries of a woman begging for mercy. She ran toward the sound, only to arrive too late, faced with the grisly remains of Malfatto's latest victim. Shaken by what she had just seen, Fiora refused to continue the mission, but Cesare threatened her life, leaving her no choice. Disguised once more in the attire of a courtesan, she sent out again to lure Malfatto from hiding. When she finally encountered him, he immediately prepared to strike. She saved herself by only shouting Cesare's name and thrusting the letter toward him. Malfatto took it without a word but didn't bother to read it. He simply stared at her in eerie silence as she slowly backed away and left. Fiora then returned home believing she was safe, unaware that Malfatto had followed her. He crept to her bedside and injected her with his syringe. The sting of the needle jolted her awake, and in a panic, she snatched her bladed fan and lashed out, catching Malfatto off guard. Though the poison coursing through her veins left her disoriented, she managed to wound him severely before collapsing. Now that he was bleeding heavily, Malfatto fled through the window. Not long afterward, now officially under Cesare's employ, Malfatto resumed his hunts near the Tiber River. There he claimed another victim, a courtesan named Mina. Her friend discovered the body and wept over her until Ezio arrived at the scene. Ezio offered his help, and the grieving courtesan pleaded for justice and directed him to find the killer. Ezio tracked Malfatto through the district, guarded by other courtesans who pointed him along the way. He finally spotted Malfatto standing near a medical store. The murderer bolted, but Ezio was quick to pursue. After a short chase, he signalled his assassin recruits to strike. Once Malfatto lay dead, Ezio gently placed a hand over the killer's mask and offered him his final rites. Gaspard de la Croix, born in 1466, was a master engineer and marksman. Cesare Borgia frequently hired him for battlefield support, tasking him with picking off easy targets from a distance. In 1502, Fiora Cavazza visited Gaspard at Cesare's request to retrieve repaired parts and equipment. She found him in his workshop, quietly singing a sorrowful French song, and she hesitated to interrupt. Throughout her visit, she perceived him as distant and haunted. He asked her unsettling questions, whether she had witnessed death and if she believed it was dictated by fate, chance, or choice. As she prepared to leave, Gaspard refused payment. Fiora watched as he calmly began tinkering with a firearm, aiming it thoughtfully out of his front window at the pedestrians passing below. The sight made her so uneasy that she vowed to avoid walking past that window again. That following year in Rome, Gaspard took part in suppressing a civilian uprising against the Borgia. With expert precision, he gunned down protesters from afar with his arquebus. Just as the rebellion dwindled to a single survivor, Ezio Auditore happened upon the scene and joined the fray. Gaspard shot the last insurgent, but before he could reload, Ezio charged. The engineer attempted to flee but reached a dead end, and now that he was cornered, he tried to fight back, only to be fatally struck by Ezio's hidden blade, dying at the age of 37. Il Carnefice, born in 1473, was an executioner active in Rome during the late 15th and early 16th century. By around 1497, he was working directly under Cesare Borgia, often receiving orders through Fiora Cavazza. During one such exchange, Fiora delivered a list of Cesare's next condemned targets. Il Carnefice studied it solemnly before telling her that her name was on the list. After letting the tension build, he burst into laughter and admitted it was a prank and that he couldn't even read. As one of Cesare's executioners, Il Carnefice carried out his duties with disturbing enthusiasm. He relished the violence, often dismembering his victims and flaunting their remains before cheering crowds. Fiora once described him as a beast, more revolting than intimidating. In 1500, his cruelty escalated. He assaulted a woman named Olivia, then hanged her. Her husband, heartbroken, remained at her side, refusing to leave her body under the threat of execution. Enraged by the man's defiance, Il Carnefice sent guards to arrest him. This drew the attention of Ezio, and so he intervened, rescuing the grieving widower. Then after hearing his story, Ezio encouraged him to take down his wife's body and promised to deal with Il Carnefice himself. Ezio kept that promise. He infiltrated the executioner's cliffside residence in the northwestern Centro district, where Il Carnefice was boasting about his latest kill. From above, Ezio struck swiftly with his hidden blade, killing the Templar at age 27. Lanz was born in 1480 and he once lived a quieter life. He fell in love, married and was expecting a child. But when the baby was miscarried, his world collapsed. Consumed by grief, he drifted into crime and eventually joined the Cento Oci, a rowdy gang of young thieves notorious for clashing with the Roman Thieves Guild and murdering their enemies by throwing them from rooftops. In time, Lanz rose to become their leader. In 1502, he caught the attention of the Borgia after he and his gang robbed one of their carriages. Fiora Cavazza arrived on Cesare Borgia's behalf to deal with him. At first, Lanz dismissed her until she tossed a knife at his feet, one he recognised as his own. Realising his mistake, he panicked and offered to return the stolen money, but Fiora had other plans. Rather than punish him, she conscripted him. From that point on, Lanz and the Cento Oci began running payments for the Borgia. That same year, tragedy struck again. Lanz's wife, overcome by despair over what he had become, threatened to take her own life if he did not return to her. She climbed to a rooftop ready to jump, hoping the sight would bring him back to himself, but Ezio reached her first. He calmed her, assuring her that she bore no blame for Lanz's actions and that he would deal with the man she once loved. Ezio tracked Lanz to the southwestern edge of the Centro district, where the thief was leaping across rooftops. Lanz spotted him and fled, hoping his agility would save him. But Ezio was relentless. Eventually, he caught up and struck with his hidden blade, ending Lanz's life at age 23. Cahin and Cahar were a twisted duo of French noble-born siblings who abandoned all dignity in favour of bloodshed and theatrics. Clad in matching Harlequin costumes, they turned murder into performance art, and Cesare Borgia eagerly hired them for it. Around 1497, they staged a lively show to lure a foreign noble, rumoured to have royal blood, into letting his guard down. As Cahar dazzled the crowd by juggling her daggers, Cahin silently slipped behind their target and drove a blade through his chair, killing him instantly. Then the real performance began. At Fiora Cavazza's signal, Cahar whipped her daggers into the throats of two unsuspecting guests, while Fiora herself joined the slaughter. By the time the screams stopped, every spectator lay dead. Years later, in 1502, Fiora was betrayed by Cesare and defected to the assassins, determined to make her former allies pay. In 1503, she led a strike team to hunt down Cahin and Cahar, who were once again performing in the streets of Rome. Cahar was the first to notice. Without hesitation, she hurled a smoke bomb into the crowd to cover their escape. As civilians scattered, Cahin made a run for it, but the assassins were ready. Cornered, he drew a dagger and fought with surprising agility, dodging rapier thrusts with practiced grace. But it wasn't enough. The assassins overwhelmed him, striking him down together. Cahar saw her brother die and she snapped. Consumed by rage, she didn't flee or beg. Instead, she lunged straight for Fiora, determined to tear her apart with her own hands. The assassins held back, forming a silent ring as the two women clashed steel against steel. Cahar fought like an animal cornered, each strike fueled by grief. But Fiora held her ground. Blow by blow, Cahar's fury burnt out, replaced by exhaustion. At last, her strength gave way, and she dropped her weapons to crawl to Cahin's lifeless body. There she gathered him into her arms. Shortly after, an assassin stepped forward with a crossbow ready in their hand. Cahar never turned around. The bolt struck clean through her skull, ending the Harlequin act forever, just as she clutched her brother one last time. Charles de la Motte, a French marquis and seasoned warrior, served both his homeland and the Templar cause with ruthless pride. As one of Cesare Borgia's key allies, he commanded a formidable host of French mercenaries, answering only to his master and his order. In 1503, he arrived at Barletta, eager to prove French superiority over the Italian knights fighting for the Spanish crown. Yet before the first lance was lowered, unseen hands were already at work. An assassin team intent on igniting discord between the Templars struck in secret. Under the cover of darkness, Tessa Varzi dusted the French combatants' supplies with a subtle poison, one so expertly applied that not even seasoned physicians could sense the tampering. When the sun rose over the field, the French knights faltered, slow in reflex, weak in breath, and unfocused in battle. Their Italian opponents claimed a clean victory, and no accusation of cheating could be made. Later that year, Cesare summoned Charles and his men to Rome. The papal armies stood aside, granting the mercenaries free passage through the city. With no one to restrain them, the French soldiers turned the streets into their playground, harassing citizens, stealing openly, and barking insults at anyone who dared protest. The city guards offered only warnings to the victims and safe passage to the offenders. The assassins could not stand idle. Under the command of Francesco Vecellio, They orchestrated swift retaliation. From the shadows, arrows struck down unsuspecting mercenaries, while others succumbed to delicately poisoned flowers slipped into their hands by Tessavazi. The attacks were precise, sending a message without revealing the full strength of the Brotherhood. But the combined fury of the French forces and the border troops soon overwhelmed the small assassin team. Forced to withdraw, they sought refuge in a nearby inn, hoping to regroup. Their enemies followed, not with swords but with fire. The building was set ablaze, and many assassins were lost in the inferno. By 1503, the damage Charles caused was not forgotten. Among those who had lost comrades was the assassin Francesco Vecellio, who had resolved to end the French Marquis's life himself. Before taking action, Francesco brought his intentions to Ezio Auditore, mentor of the Italian Brotherhood. Tradition demanded permission, but Francesco made it clear he would act regardless of Ezio's answer. Ezio saw the fire burning in him and spoke plainly. Revenge, he admitted, was a powerful fuel, but one that could easily be consumed by the man who carried it. Francesco's anger, untempered, could lead to recklessness and failure. Rather than risk his brother's life or the mission's integrity, Ezio chose to shoulder the burden himself. After tracking Charles, Ezio hunted the Templar down and struck without hesitation. The Marquis fell with defiance still on his tongue, refusing repentance, secrets, all acknowledgement of guilt. Even at the edge of death, Charles clung to his pride and the silence of his order. Rocco Topolo was no mere sellsword. He was a Templar captain and a commander of men whose loyalty was bought in blood and coin. Though he supplied mercenaries to Cesare Borgia, he served no master but his own ambition. Around 1497, Fiora Cavazza was dispatched to strike a deal with him. Rocco welcomed her with the kind of hospitality only a man surrounded by killers could afford. Fine food, strong wine, and violence for sport. At his command, 2 of his men fought for their amusement, trading steel until the floor ran slick with blood. Rocco then showcased paintings of his past campaigns, tributes to victories he claimed with pride. In decades of command, he boasted he had only lost twice, and neither time he had been the one given the orders. When Fiora evaluated his forces for Cesare's purposes, Rocco praised their skill and savagery, insisting that each had slain countless rivals. Once payment was made, he handed over the soldiers' contracts. Fiora even tried to purchase Rocco's own allegiance, but he refused, stating that if Cesare wanted his sword, he'd have to pay more than anyone else. Years later, the alliance shattered. In 1503, after Cesare betrayed Fiora and she defected to the assassins, she turned her attention to the enemies she had once called allies. Rocco was the first on her list. She didn't seek his death out of hatred, but his men were still bound to Cesare by gold, and the Brotherhood could never match that price. Eliminating him was the only way to cut off his support. With a strike force of assassins at her back, Fiora launched an assault on his stronghold and training grounds. Arrows fell and blades flashed as his men outside the walls were cut down. Fiora assessed the defences, then led the push inside, where Rocco and his veteran fighters stood their ground. The clash was brutal on both sides. One by one, Rocco's warriors were cut down until only he remained. Rather than surrender, he did what he had always promised he would. He charged headlong into the fray, facing impossible odds with steel in hand. Outnumbered but unbroken, Rocco Topolo died the honourable death he had long imagined. Silvestro Sabatini was born in 1472, and though he liked to dress himself in titles and silk, he was no actual noble. He was a human trafficker and a Templar loyal to Cesare Borgia. He clawed his way upward through flattery, cruelty and coin. He was the cousin to Andrea Sabatini, a student of Raphael, but Silvestro's ambitions were far removed from the art of honour. At some point he struck a deal with the Borgias, trading loyalty for status. That loyalty didn't spare him when he failed Cesare. After botching a mission involving a courtesan sometime before 1502, he was dragged before Micheletto Carella. As punishment, Micheletto severed Silvestro's left arm. When Silvestro's services became useful again, Fiora Cavazza was sent to deliver a replacement, a mechanical arm forged by Cesare's engineer. Silvestro scoffed at first, sneering that the arm was too plain, unadorned by jewels or rare metals. But when Fiora offered to take it back to Cesare, he seized the device and fitted it to his shoulder without another complaint. Restored at least in function, Silvestro resumed his work under Borgia command. From Palatine Hill, he ran a slave operation that preyed on Rome itself. His men snatched citizens from the streets, men, women, and even children, and loaded them onto ships bound for profit. In 1502, fate turned. Ezio came across a young boy weeping in the streets, his mother taken by Silvestro's men. Ezio chose to intervene. Tracking Sabatini through the Centro district, he shadowed him back to his base at Palatine Hill. Once there, Silvestro was seen negotiating over his captives with a woman, only to send her away in a rage when she dared question his mechanical arm. His thoughts turned dark, he seemed ready to silence her permanently, but he never got the chance. Ezio did not strike alone, he dispatched the assassin recruits to end Sabatini's life once and for all. Little is recorded of Theodore's origins or exploits, but his loyalty to Cesare Borgia placed him wherever his master required, even in the dirt and dust of a racetrack. In 1502, Theodore rode at Cesare's side during a horse race rigged in the Templars' favour. The favourite to win was Donato Mancini. Cesare would not tolerate a loss to a common competitor. Mid-race, Theodore turned his horse into a weapon and drew steel, slashing at Mancini in an effort to force him from the course. But Donato was quicker than expected. He dodged Theodore's attacks and surged ahead, winning the race in full view of the Italian spectators, and worse, Cesare himself. Theodore's interference failed, and Cesare's fury was all the reward he received. Ristoro, born in 1465, was a Minim priest in name only and a Templar in truth. Despite his vows, he was a regular at the Rosa in Fiore, the most sought-after brothel in Rome. Around 1500, when Cesare Borgia began gathering useful allies, Ristoro quickly caught his attention. In exchange for a steady supply of girls to satisfy his vices, Ristoro provided Cesare with things only the church could grant: sacred icons, forged amulets, official seals, coins for bribes, and letters of condemnation or absolution as needed. His corruption was a valuable commodity. Fiora Cavazza had known him during her time as a courtesan, and despised him for his perversity. When she later entered Cesare's service and was forced to deliver girls to him once again, she hoped he wouldn't remember her. He did. He singled her out, stroked her cheek, and called her his favourite until she drove her boot into his groin, and threatened him with Cesare's anger. He shrank back, only to reach for her again, before being distracted by the other girls. Ristoro's depravity drew suspicion from his fellow clergy. 2 of his own students once confronted him, and he quietly poisoned both of them. The Borgia brought him absolution. When another brother dared to speak the truth publicly near the Colosseum, Ezio heard him out and decided action was needed. Ezio tracked Ristoro to a church where the priest stood flanked by Borgia guards and armed with a spear. The assassin dispatched the soldiers with ease and struck from above, driving his hidden blade into the corrupt priest and ending his life once and for all. Il Lupo, or the Wolf in English, was a Templar agent trained to mimic the assassins themselves. After Fiora Cavazza and Baltasar had spent time stalking and studying the Brotherhood, they decided to fashion a weapon in their likeness. They trained Il Lupo in everything they had observed: the assassin's agility, their stealth, their killing techniques. To complete the imitation, he was given his own version of the hidden blade. Once his training was complete and his orders drilled into him, Cesare Borgia dispatched him on missions as a counterfeit assassin in the Templar service. Eventually, Fiora was betrayed by Cesare and defected to the assassins, but that left a danger behind. Il Lupo knew too much about what she had learned, and as long as he lived, he was a threat to her new allies. Eliminating him would both protect herself and scrub away evidence of her past work. To draw him out, Fiora left a coded signal on the Pasquino statue. She then waited for him at the docks at sunset, shadowed by an assassin sent to guard her. She was still recovering from a recent attempt on her life by Baltasar. But the wolf arrived first, silently killed her escort and dumped the body into the river before warning Fiora that she'd been followed. Thinking quickly, Fiora spun a lie. Cesare had supposedly ordered a target killed aboard a ship in the harbour. The wolf turned to survey it, asking how he was meant to reach the vessel unseen. That moment of distraction was all she needed. Fiora struck from behind with a poisoned iron fan, slicing it into his back. He lashed out, struck her, and drew his rapier, but the toxin was already at work. He choked, vomited, and spat curses and questions at her as he died. An imitation assassin undone by the very deception he'd been moulded to emulate. Leah de Russo was born in 1476, and she was a seasoned smuggler of rare goods who operated from several hideouts across Rome, including the ruins of the Baths of Caracalla in the Campania district. She was also a Templar agent, and from 1497 to 1503, she worked under Cesare Borgia, supplying him with contraband and valuable artifacts. Fiora Cavazza, who acted as Cesare's courier, was typically the one sent to collect these deliveries. On one of these runs, Fiora followed Leah into a shop the smuggler used as a stash point. The place smelled of death, Fiora observed, half expecting to find the actual shopkeeper's corpse tucked away somewhere. Leah's stock ranged from mundane trinkets to priceless antiquities, but she always made it clear she expected full payment and a generous tip for every deal. In 1503, Leah accepted a contract to eliminate a young shopkeeper named Monica. The woman had refused to shut down her store when the Borgia claimed control over the district, and Leah was sent to make an example. Ezio encountered Monica's grieving fiancé, and after learning what had happened, vowed to hunt Leah down. He tracked her to the Baths of Caracalla, where she was standing over yet another fresh kill. The moment she spotted Ezio, she bolted, shouting insults as she ran. But the chase was short-lived. Ezio overtook her and dispatched her with his hidden blade. Leah holds a small but notable place in assassin history. She was the first woman Ezio ever killed, and one of only 3 female targets he eliminates across the entire series. There is literally no information surrounding Leandros in regards to his early years, but starting around 1510, Leandros and his Templar forces occupied the Syrian city of Masyaf, which had long been the centre of the Levantine assassins. Their interest in this site began after obtaining Niccolo Polo's journal, The Secret Crusade, which described Altair's hidden library and the keys required to access it. The Templars spent a full year examining the fortress and eventually located the library's entrance. However, despite 3 additional months of excavation attempts, they were unable to open the sealed door. In 1511, Ezio Auditore travelled to Masyaf seeking the same library. Unaware that the Templars had already taken control of the area, Leandros' soldiers ambushed him, wounding him with an arrow and engaging him in large numbers. Leandros himself observed from above rather than participating in the fight, which he didn't really need to do anyway, even though Ezio resisted and eliminated many attackers. The Templars ultimately overwhelmed him and subdued him. Ezio was then brought to the castle's watchtower for execution by hanging. Leandros personally placed the noose around his neck, but at the moment of execution, Ezio managed to reverse the situation by pulling the rope around Leandros' neck and jumping from the platform. The resulting tension forced the Templars to cut Ezio loose in order to save Leandros from being strangled. Leandros ordered his men to pursue Ezio, who had already landed safely below and escaped along the tower's exterior. Shortly afterward, Leandros departed Masyaf by carriage. Ezio, however, quickly caught up to him and managed to grab hold of a rope trailing behind the wagon, resulting in him being dragged across the ground as he tried to pull himself closer. After a few unsuccessful attempts to dislodge him, Leandros abandoned his own carriage, moving on to a nearby soldier's vehicle and forcibly removing the driver from his position. Eventually, Ezio recovered from being dragged and climbed onto the back of Leandros' original carriage, taking control of it and continuing the pursuit. As the two moved along a narrow mountain route, they struggled for position, and Leandros ultimately succeeded in manoeuvring past Ezio. Following Leandros' order, one of the Templar guards threw an explosive device beneath Ezio's carriage. The resulting blast sent both the carriage and Ezio over the edge of the cliff. Believing the situation resolved, Leandros instructed his men to secure the path. However, despite his injuries, Ezio managed to climb back up the cliff and confront the Templar soldiers once more. Noting the assassin's weakened state, Leandros commanded the men to either kill him or throw themselves into the canyon, before proceeding towards the nearby Atlas village. Unaware that Ezio had survived, Leandros continued through the village, not realising that Ezio had defeated his soldiers and was following him in secret. Using his eagle vision, Ezio tracked Leandros' movements without being detected. Eventually, Leandros made his way into a nearby fortress, where Ezio finally chose to reveal himself. Leandros mocked Ezio and claimed that he had no possibility of escape. Ezio responded by stating that neither of them would be able to flee, then cut the chain supporting the portcullis, sealing the gate and preventing additional Templar reinforcements from entering. Leandros immediately retreated up a tower within the fortress, with Ezio close behind. After navigating through the garrison, Ezio reached the tower's summit, where Leandros was waiting for a final confrontation. The Templar asked what it would take for Ezio to kill him, a question Ezio dismissed before striking him with a headbutt and ending his life using the hidden blade. Interestingly, the novelisation presents a different version of events. In that account, Ezio shoots Leandros in the knee, and Leandros dies from blood loss after surrendering Niccolo Polo's journal. As Leandros lay dying, he disclosed that the remaining Templars were already nearing possession of the Masyaf keys, which would allow them to uncover the location of the Grand Temple. After Leandros took his final breath, Ezio recovered Niccolo Polo's journal from his body, and so Leandros died sometime in March of 1511. Shakuli was born into a Turkmen tribe in eastern Anatolia, a region situated along the outer edges of the Ottoman Empire and often subjected to its control. During his youth, an Ottoman attack on his tribe left him orphaned, and so in search of both revenge and a new community, he was taken in by a group of Saravid sympathisers, and later became involved with the Templar Order. Over time, Shakuli developed a deep resentment toward the Ottoman Turks for the suffering they had caused his people, as well as toward anyone who opposed the Templar cause. This hostility eventually shaped his personal mission to remove anyone who stood in the way of the Order's objectives. Shakulu eventually rose to become a prominent and feared member of the Templar Order. He entered into a partnership with fellow Templar Manuel Palaiologos, an heir of the former Byzantine imperial line. Shakuli supported Manuel's plan to rebuild the remnants of the Byzantine Empire, motivated in part by the belief that he would be rewarded if Manuel succeeded. Despite this cooperation, their alliance was strained, as the Byzantines had historically been adversaries of Shakulu's people, much like the Ottomans. In mid-1511, Shakulu and Manuel travelled to Constantinople to meet with the Janissary captain Tariq Barletti. Their purpose was to gain access to the arsenal and examine a shipment of weapons that Tariq had agreed to supply to their forces. While reviewing the firearms, Shakuli reminded Manuel of the assistance he had provided in rebuilding the latter's army, emphasizing that his contribution should not be overlooked. Manuel acknowledged this and assured Shakulu that he would not forget the obligation he owed him. In 1512, Shakulu withdrew to the Templar headquarters in Derinkuyu, Cappadocia, and during this time, several spies working for Tariq Barletti were captured. Because they were Ottoman Turks, Shakulu personally executed many of them, killing them brutally. Afterwards, he met with Manuel, who reprimanded him for his excessive cruelty towards the prisoners, but after ignoring the criticism, Shakulu ordered his men to bring the remaining captives to the chapel, where he intended to torture and execute them publicly. When one of the guards responded that he did not have the key to the chapel, Shakulu angrily commanded him to locate it. Unbeknownst to Shakulu, the assassin Ezio Auditore had been observing the meeting. Upon hearing the mention of the key, Ezio set out to obtain it from the Byzantine captain named Nicholas, who was on leave from his duties. Soon after, a crowd gathered at the chapel for the planned executions. Shakulu took his position in the open courtyard and began killing a spy named Janos by beating him. Guided there by Janos' fellow spy Delara, Ezio climbed onto a cross above the courtyard and attempted to assassinate Shakulu with his hidden blade. Believing the strike to be fatal, Ezio stated that Shakulu deserved no mercy for the pleasure he took in cruelty. However, Shakulu's armour absorbed the blow, allowing him to survive and seize Ezio by the throat. Ezio countered by stabbing him in the chest with his hook blade, but Shakulu still managed to throw him aside, leading to a direct confrontation between them. Although he was supported by several Byzantine soldiers, Shakulu was ultimately defeated and killed by Ezio in a duel. Honestly, Shakulu's ability to survive 2 initial hidden blade strikes and continue fighting is actually insane, and just illustrates the extent of his physical resilience. Anyway, Shakulu died sometime in March of 1512, with his age being unknown. Manuel was born on the 2nd of January 1455, 2 years after the fall of Constantinople, as an heir to the Byzantine throne and the son of one of the 2 despots of Morea. He spent his early years in Glarenza, but in 1460 the Ottoman invasion forced his family to flee to Corfu. They eventually relocated to Rome, where Manuel's father, Thomas Palaiologos, converted to Catholicism and was formally acknowledged as the legitimate Byzantine emperor. While living in Rome, both Manuel and his brother Andreas nurtured ambitions of restoring the Byzantine Empire. Through Andreas, Manuel came into contact with the Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, Grand Master of the Italian Templars, as well as Sem, the exiled brother of Sultan Bayezid II. Both brothers joined the Templar Order, and with Rodrigo's backing, they developed plans to recapture Constantinople and re-establish the empire. Although Andreas favoured a military reconquest, Manuel preferred a more discreet approach. Manuel relocated to Constantinople sometime after 1485, where he offered his claim to the Byzantine throne to Sultan Bayezid II in exchange for a substantial pension. His brother Andreas, who remained in Rome, regarded this decision as a betrayal. Manuel converted to Islam and integrated fully into Ottoman society. By the 1490s, when Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI, the Pope lost interest in supporting the brothers' ambitions to reclaim Constantinople, leaving them without the backing they had previously relied upon. Andreas, who had depended heavily on the papal support, died impoverished in Rome in 1502, making Manuel the last surviving male claimant to the Byzantine imperial line. In 1509, a major earthquake struck Constantinople, prompting Sultan Bayezid to move his court. Viewing this as an opportunity, Manuel began assembling a force of Byzantine Templars within Constantinople. With the Sultan absent, these Templar forces acted with increasing boldness, eventually launching attacks against the local assassins, who had enjoyed decades of relative calm. The escalation triggered a covert conflict between Byzantine and Ottoman factions across the region. From the underground city in Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, Manuel directed these efforts while keeping his involvement concealed. Meanwhile, the Sultan remained unaware of the Byzantine Templar resurgence as he was preoccupied with a succession struggle against his son Selim. Manuel was eventually assigned to the Templar expedition in Masyaf, whose goal was to obtain the Masyaf keys required to open the underground library constructed by Altair. With guidance from Niccolo Polo's journal, The Secret Crusade, the Templars succeeded in recovering one of the keys from beneath Topkapi Palace in Constantinople, after which it was placed in Manuel's possession. In late 1511, Manuel arranged a deal with Tariq Barletti, captain of the Ottoman Janissaries, to acquire Ottoman firearms for his covert Byzantine Templar forces in Cappadocia. Accompanied by his fellow Templar, the Turkmen renegade Shakulu, Manuel met with Tariq in Constantinople to inspect the weapons stored in the city's arsenal. Afterward, he and Shikuli departed for Cappadocia, unaware that Ezio would soon follow them. Upon Ezio's arrival in Derinkuyu, the Byzantine Templars stationed in the underground city suffered heavy losses, and Shikuli was ultimately killed by Ezio. Following the destruction of the Templars' munition supply, Manuel emerged publicly in an attempt to reassure and organise the city's inhabitants. However, once he spotted Ezio, he immediately retreated further into the caverns. Manuel's escape was halted when he reached an underground river, leaving him with no option but to confront Ezio directly. He drew his sword and engaged the assassin, but was quickly overpowered and received a fatal wound. With his final words, Manuel handed over his Masyaf key and challenged Ezio to discover whether he could reach Altair's library alive. He died shortly afterward in March 1512 at the age of about 57. The eldest surviving son of Sultan Bayezid II, Ahmet was born in 1465 in Amasa and was designated as his father's heir early in his life. Sharing Bayezid's preference for scholarship over warfare, Ahmet was widely regarded as the most suitable and moderate candidate to inherit the Ottoman throne. His introduction to the Templar ideology began through correspondence with his exiled uncle Sem, who had become a member of the order. Ahmet found that the Templar view was appealing, specifically their aim to eliminate divisions among people by uniting them under a single authority. During their exchanges, Sem also informed him about Niccolo Polo's journal, which described Altair's hidden library in Masyaf. Following the earthquake that struck Constantinople in 1509, Bayezid moved his court. In the Sultan's absence, the Byzantine Rite entered the city under the leadership of Manuel and aimed to restore the Byzantine state. Ahmet joined the Templar order during this period, though doing so created significant internal conflict for him. As an Ottoman prince, acting in alignment with either the Ottomans or Byzantines risked betraying the other side. Due to his youth, charisma and leadership ability, Ahmet gradually assumed the role of Grand Master of the Byzantine Rite, with Manuel serving as his subordinate. Meanwhile, Bayezid and his son Selim had become embroiled in their own struggle for succession, with Selim attempting to secure the Ottoman throne for himself. In 1511, Ahmet began implementing several initiatives to strengthen his political influence within the Ottoman Empire. One of his primary objectives was to locate the Grand Temple of the First Civilization, which he believed could be accessed through the library of Altair. To pursue this goal, Ahmet appointed Manuel to lead the Masyaf expedition and provided him with Niccolo Polo's journal, which contained instructions for finding the 5 Masyaf keys required to open the library. The first one of these keys was discovered by Ahmet's trusted associate, Hasan Pasha, in the tunnels beneath Topkapi Palace, exposed by the 1509 earthquake. Within the empire itself, Ahmet orchestrated a plan to have Templar agents abduct his nephew, Prince Suleiman, during a cultural expedition. His intention was to rescue the prince afterward, thereby gaining public admiration and reinforcing his position. Ahmet attended the event at Topkapi Palace while Templars disguised as guests attempted the abduction. The plan was put to a stop when the infiltrators were killed by Ottoman assassins disguised as Italian minstrels. These assassins, acting under the direction of their leader Yusuf Tazim, prevented the kidnapping and undermined Ahmet's scheme. Following the failed attempt, Ahmet used the Janissaries' known dislike of him to his advantage by accusing their captain, Tarek Baletti, of conspiring against him. Later, Tariq was assassinated by Ezio within the Janissary camp, and Ahmet was quickly suspected of orchestrating the killing, which further harmed his reputation. When Ahmet went to find Suleiman at Topkapi Palace to inform him of Tariq's death, he noticed the prince meeting with Ezio, introduced to him under the alias Marcello. The encounter caused Ahmet to grow increasingly wary of Ezio and his involvement with his nephew. In March of 1512, Ahmet travelled to Cappadocia, arriving shortly after Ezio had killed Manuel and taken the Masyaf key from his body. This provided Ahmet an opportunity to confront Ezio directly. During their exchange, Ahmet revealed his position as the leader of the Byzantine Rite and threatened to target Ezio's companion, Sophia Sartor, when Ezio insisted that he did not possess the remaining Masyaf keys. Ahmet then left his subordinates to engage Ezio while he returned to Constantinople to arrange Sophia's capture. The abduction, during which Yusuf was killed, provoked the assassins and led them to launch a full-scale assault on the arsenal in Constantinople, where Ahmet had taken temporary refuge. Although many Templars were killed in the attack, Ahmet secured his safety by reminding Ezio that Sophia remained in his custody. Offering to release her in exchange for the Masyaf keys, he arranged to meet Ezio near Galata Tower. Ahmet and his guards met Ezio on the ramparts connected to the tower, and after a tense exchange, Ezio surrendered the keys. Ahmet then directed him to Sophia, supposedly located at the top of the tower. However, the woman placed there was a decoy, an assassin named Aziz. While Ahmet had ordered the real Sophia taken elsewhere to be hanged, buying himself time to escape. As Ezio worked to save both the decoy and Sophia, Ahmet, now in possession of all the Masyaf keys, made a swift and confident departure for Masyaf. As Alamut and his entourage departed Constantinople in a series of horse-drawn wagons, they were pursued by Ezio and Sophia, the latter having been freed from Alamut's captors. Leaving his soldiers to delay the pair, Alamut rode off, prompting a rapid and chaotic chase. Ezio managed to eliminate the other wagons, but Alamut rammed Ezio's cart, sending him over the edge. Ezio saved himself by deploying a parachute and grabbing a trailing rope attached to Alamut's wagon, while Sophia continued to pursue on her own. Despite several further attempts by Alamut's followers to shake them, Ezio and Sophia remained in pursuit. Believing he had finally escaped, Alamut destroyed Sophia's cart. However, as he pressed forward, Ezio leapt at him from a nearby ledge, knocking him off his seat. Both men tumbled off a cliff, engaging in hand-to-hand combat as they fell. Moments before impact, Ezio deployed another parachute to break his fall, and Alamut survived by clinging onto him. Once they reached the ground and faced one another again, their standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Alamut's brother Selim, accompanied by the Sultan's army. Believing that their father still ruled, Alamut attempted to assert his authority, reminding the soldiers of their oath to serve him as heir. To his shock, Selim revealed that their father had abdicated, and that he had already assumed the Sultanate. Selim then forced Alamut's back against a weakened section of the cliffside fence and strangled him, having uncovered Alamut's treason against the Ottoman state. Ignoring his brother's pleas, Selim continued until the fence gave way, sending Alamut over the cliff to his death on the 25th of April 1512, at approximately 47 years old. Like many characters on this list, there is not much known about Kadir's early life. However, Kadir served as an arms dealer and information broker for the Byzantine Rite of the Templar Order during the early 16th century. He also operated covertly as an agent of the Kizilbash, a loose coalition of Shia Turkmen militant groups that rebelled against the Ottoman Empire during the same period. As part of his dual role, Kadir was assigned to undermine the Ottoman military from within by joining their artillery corps and working to sabotage its operations. Samila Kadim was a high-ranking Templar who used her noble background to obtain information and manipulate people, ultimately delivering them to her patron's control. Unlike most upper-class Templars who typically stayed removed from direct violence, Samila had a strong inclination toward killing and was known for relentlessly targeting anyone who crossed her. Her wealth came from dealing in relics, confidential information, and other valuable items on behalf of the Templars. She has some similarities with Leah de Russo, the smuggler from Brotherhood, as both women worked in the trade of artifacts and valuable goods for the Templars, and wore outfits featuring a green colour palette. Right, so this is the first character that actually has a decent amount of information about him. Georgios Kostas was a member of the Byzantine Rite within the Templar Order, known for his exceptional physical strength and violent methods. Originally from Greece, he later travelled to the mountains of Thrace to fight, where he gained recognition as a skilled and formidable warrior. His reputation eventually attracted the attention of the Templars, who recruited him and granted him the privilege of fighting under their banner. In 1511, while in Constantinople, Georgios was assigned to kill a local printer. The target, however, was being protected by an assassin apprentice, who escorted him through the city, with their mentor Ezio Auditore observing from above. When the printer saw Georgios in the street, Georgios ordered the apprentice not to interfere. The printer escaped while the apprentice engaged Georgios in combat. Ezio pursued the fleeing printer and defended him from a Byzantine attack in a nearby cemetery. After making sure that the printer was safe, Ezio returned to assist his apprentice. He found the apprentice resting against a wall, explaining that they had just narrowly defeated Georgios, but had never encountered someone with such overwhelming strength. Ezio cautioned the apprentice to stay alert, believing that Georgios would return. Later in 1511, Ezio met again with the same apprentice, who reported that Georgios was now targeting the printer's father, a local herald. The two assassins met with the herald to warn him about the danger created by his son's situation, and during their conversation, Templar thugs attacked, interrupting the meeting. Although the assassins successfully fought off the attackers, Georgios appeared and seized the herald, demanding that the printer to be brought to him. Ezio's apprentice climbed to a ledge overlooking Georgios, while Ezio positioned himself across from them to divert Georgios' attention. While Georgios focused on Ezio, the apprentice dropped from above and killed him. As he died, Georgios claimed that even though the assassins had ended his life, his reputation as a champion would endure. His exact birthday is unknown, but his death occurred in 1511. Evelyn Guerrero was a pirate who targeted ships coming back from treasure hunting voyages. She would wait until the crews returned exhausted and vulnerable, then have her group of loyal followers strike. This approach proved highly effective, and a significant portion of the stolen goods she acquired was used to support Templar activities. Unfortunately, this is all we know about her. Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Draculesti, and Dracula, was the Voivod of Wallachia, ruling the territory at several points between 1448 and 1476. Born between 1428 and 1431, Vlad was secretly aligned with the Templars and contributed significantly to their efforts against the Ottoman Empire. In 1476, he attempted to start an uprising in Hungary, but was defeated by the Ottoman Grand Vizier Ishak Pasha, who also served as the mentor of the Ottoman assassins. After his capture, Vlad was killed and his decapitated head was sent to Constantinople as a display of victory. Both his head and his sword were later placed in a specially constructed prison outside of the Constantinian walls. The Wallachian noble and assassin Vali Saltradat admired Vlad and believed the Ottomans were responsible for his death due to their truce with the assassins. But I will talk more about Vali later in the video. In 1511, Ezio retrieved Vlad's sword from the location where it had been stored. Vlad eventually became the source of various vampire legends associated with his name. Folklore claimed he might have been a vampire due to his pale complexion and his tendency to remain indoors for long periods. These stories, combined with his harsh and violent actions as a ruler, formed the basis of the vampiric mythology connected to the Wallachian Voivod. Adding to these rumours, his tomb was reported to contain a skull with unusually long canine teeth. Haras was an apprentice of the Levantine Brotherhood who became frustrated with his slow advancement within the order. This dissatisfaction ultimately led him to defect to the Templars and assist them in their attack on Masyaf. In 1189, Haras betrayed the assassins by guiding a Templar force to launch a siege on their stronghold. The assault resulted in the deaths of many assassins, and their mentor Al-Muwalim was taken prisoner. When Altair returned to Masyaf, he fought through the occupied village and confronted Haras, who threatened to kill Al-Muwalim. Haras then withdrew to the fortress, now under Templar control, and executed the remaining assassin captives, Vahid Ahmedi, Razit el-Zubaydi, and Fad el-Fahmi, by using a crossbow. Although the portcullis was closed to keep Altair out, he climbed the fortress walls and killed Haras from above. In his final moments, Haras rejected the assassins and insisted that the Templars possessed the true understanding of humanity, maintaining that the Assassin's Creed was misguided. Centuries afterwards, in 2014, Master Templar Juhani Otzoberg referenced Haras's defection as an example that some assassins would always be willing to abandon their order in favour of the Templar cause. Altair believed that Haras preferred shortcuts rather than progressing through the ranks through genuine effort. Haras was also known for being highly adaptable in combat and for adjusting his demeanour to match those around him, a skill he often used to uncover information about others. Cyril of Rhodes began his life as a priest in the Eastern Orthodox Church. After being publicly shamed by Pachomius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, for behaviour deemed unbecoming of the faith, Cyril spent 10 years planning revenge. During this period, he abandoned the doctrines he once supported and used his remaining position in the church to undermine it from within, aligning himself with Templar goals. When Cyril began plotting to assassinate the Patriarch, an assassin apprentice learned of the rumour and informed Ezio. The information mentioned only a Templar agent operating in the area without naming Cyril directly. Because his identity was unclear, Ezio and the apprentice searched for the operative and eventually met a church member familiar with Cyril's background and location. After receiving this information, they went to the described site and found 3 individuals who all had a match with the description. Since all 3 appeared nearly identical, Ezio attempted to use his eagle sense to determine which one was Cyril. Before he could act, the apprentice hastily attacked the wrong person, allowing Cyril to escape unharmed. After the apprentice gained more experience, Ezio brought him back to resume the search for Cyril. When they went to meet their previous contact, they found him dead, killed by Cyril to prevent him from revealing more information. Using his abilities, Ezio tracked Cyril's movements starting from the body. He eventually spotted Cyril speaking with a group of civilians and determined that the apprentice needed to create a distraction so he could observe Cyril without being noticed. Following Ezio's instructions, the apprentice stole Cyril's pouch and fled, prompting Cyril to chase after them while Ezio followed from a distance. The apprentice led Cyril to a small balcony and then revealed their connection to the assassins. Cyril then declared that he would not allow an assassin to stop his plans and attempted to fight the apprentice. Ezio intervened quickly and killed Cyril with his hidden blade, bringing the pursuit to an end sometime in 1511. Anakletos was an orphan who was sold into slavery at a young age and trained as a gladiator. As he competed in the arenas, his developing combat abilities drew the attention of the Templars, who eventually recruited him. From that point on, he pursued his assigned targets with determination and brutality. Although he served the Templars, Anakletos showed little interest in their ideology, instead using his affiliation as a justification for killing. Unfortunately, there is no available information about the specific period during which he was active as a gladiator. O'Day Duncas was a cousin of the first Sultan of the Sennar Sultanate and a member of the Byzantine Rite of the Templar Order. In 1505, he was forced to leave his homeland for reasons that remain unknown, leading to a separation from his family. After eventually relocating to Alexandria, he was introduced to the Templar ideology, which he fully accepted, calling himself the guardian of the truth. He soon joined the order, believing it would enable him to achieve his personal goals. Around this time, an apprentice working under Ezio reported suspicious bribery activity occurring in the markets near the Constantine South Assassin Den. Investigating the situation, Ezio went to a marketplace where he encountered O'Day, though he did not yet know who he was. Using his eagle vision, Ezio identified which merchants had received bribe money, and then questioned a nearby individual about the person working with O'Day. He learned that the associate was named Theodoros Komnenos. Ezio and his apprentice travelled across the rooftops to reach Theodoros's residence without being detected. After entering quietly, Ezio confronted Theodoros, revealing that he and the apprentice were assassins. Theodoros immediately panicked and begged for his life, but seeing his terrified state, Ezio chose to leave the apprentice with him so they could obtain the information they need once Theodoros regained his composure. When Ezio and the apprentice met with Theodoros again, they overheard him describing O'Day's activities and those of his fellow Templars. He entertained that their plan was to artificially raise prices in districts controlled by the assassins in order to turn public opinion against them. Ezio and the apprentice followed Theodoros to his meeting with O'Day. During their discussion, O'Day offered Theodoros a secure position in Alexandria if he continued cooperating with the Templars. Initially silent, Theodoros soon confessed that the assassins had been tailing him. Angered by this revelation, O'Day stabbed Theodoros and ordered his bodyguard to discard the body in the street. Ezio reacted quickly, sending the apprentice after O'Day while he pursued and killed the bodyguard. When Ezio returned to the chase, he found O'Day attempting to escape and intercepted him, cutting off his path. In his final words, O'Day claimed that being struck down by the assassins fulfilled his life's purpose. There is really not much known about Scaevola Spina, other than he was a knight active in Constantinople in the early 16th century who supported the Templars with his combat skills. He followed their directives without hesitation and eliminated any targets they assigned to him. His preferred weapon was a massive greatsword. Serafo was a Venetian expatriate and Templar agent residing in the Ottoman Empire. His medical practice declined over time, leading to more patient deaths than recoveries. Similar to the Roman Templar Dr. Malfatto, he used a syringe, but his contained a mercury-based solution that he developed himself. Dorcamaro was a Venetian expatriate in the Renaissance period who worked as a jester in Constantinople. After his behaviour contributed to the political downfall of a vizier favoured by the Sultan, he began carrying out assignments for the Templars. Unlike the French Templar operative Cahine, who used multiple weapons, Dorcamaro relied on a single Kandjar-style dagger to kill the targets he was ordered to eliminate. Vali was born into Wallachian nobility and joined the assassins in his early 20s. He remained committed to the creed for close to 10 years. When the assassins agreed to a truce with the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II, Vali saw that decision as a betrayal of his homeland, believing it ignored past Ottoman conquests in Wallachia and the killing of his personal role model, Vlad Tepes. As a result, he left the assassins to join the Templars. Seeking retaliation against both the Ottoman Empire and the Assassin Order, his prior assassin training made him a highly effective operative, and he quickly became one of the Templars' most dangerous and feared enforcers. By 1511, Vali had killed multiple assassin members, drawing attention from an experienced assassin apprentice, who alerted the Italian assassin mentor, Ezio Auditore. Investigating a courtyard, Ezio used his eagle vision to find signs of Vali's recent kills. During the search, Vali appeared, killed an Ottoman guard from above and fled. Ezio and the apprentice pursued him, but when the apprentice attempted to attack Vali from a rooftop and missed, nearby Byzantine guards intervened in response to Vali's calls for assistance. This disruption gave Vali enough time to escape. Vali later staged a diversion by capturing two assassins and placing them under Byzantine guard. This forced Ezio's attention towards a rescue operation, giving Vali enough time to infiltrate the assassins' main headquarters without opposition. Once the captives were freed, Vali ordered a Byzantine attack on the assassin-controlled Galata Den. The resulting conflict caused significant casualties for both the assassins and the Templars. Shortly after the battle, Vali and Ezio faced each other briefly before Vali attempted to withdraw again. He was intercepted by the same assassin apprentice who had previously investigated his activities. This time, the apprentice launched a successful attack from a rooftop. which killed Valley. Before he died, Valley stated that he defected because he believed the Assassin Order had acted against the interests of his homeland. He maintained that he could not continue serving a group he felt had failed his people. He soon died after making this statement. Lysistrata was a prominent Byzantine performer in Constantinople who also came from a wealthy background. She received artistic training and financial backing from the Templars and used her social influence to support their interests. She interacted with visiting Ottoman officials and used personal appeal and relationships to gather information that benefited the Templars. In 1511, Lysistrata travelled through the Imperial South District with a male associate. Their movements attracted the attention of Ezio and one of his apprentices, who began monitoring them. The apprentice followed them at street level while Ezio observed from the rooftops. When Lysistrata and her associate stopped at the city's hippodrome to talk, she noticed the approaching apprentice. She then wounded her associate with a dagger and immediately deployed a smoke device to cover her escape. The apprentice attempted to stop her but was unable to reach her before she disappeared. Afterward, Ezio and the apprentice pursued the direction she fled, discovering multiple dead men in the area. This indicated that her objective had included further killings and that the deaths were connected to the Templar operations. Later in 1511, Ezio met with the same apprentice, who had since advanced to the position of an assassin den leader. The apprentice informed him that Lysistrata intended to perform publicly, using a stage alias. Ezio noted that Lysistrata was aware of the risks of exposing herself, but had allowed personal pride to influence her decision. He and the den leader then went to the waterfront, where the performance was scheduled. Both assassins planned to intervene directly, rather than observe from a distance. Ezio approached the audience and killed Lysistrata while she was addressing the crowd. As she died, Lysistrata argued that although the assassins were effective in their work, a complete victory in their conflict would remove complexity from society. Mirella Juric was a Romani operative who worked with the Templars by providing access to a large underground network involved in theft, smuggling and organised crime. She was known locally as a skilled thief and fortune teller, but she also gained notoriety for exploiting low-income communities through deceptive schemes. These actions led to internal opposition and some Romani groups attempted to remove her from position. The conflicts surrounding her activities were reported to an assassin apprentice, who informed Ezio after being appointed leader of the Constantine North District. The apprentice initially requested Ezio's help protecting a Romani delegation en route to confront Mirella. During the escort, Mirella deployed multiple hired attackers to intercept them, but Ezio defeated all of them. When the group reached the meeting point, Mirella was already speaking with other Romani members, who criticised her methods and accused her of deception. Mirella reacted by killing one of the Romani critics with poison and staggering the scene to make it appear that the incoming delegation was responsible. While the apprentice attempted to pursue and stop her, Mirella escaped before she could be reached. After her attack on fellow Romani members, Mirella was later seen purchasing herbs and spices in a marketplace. Among the items she brought was datura, a plant that can be used to produce a highly toxic poison. The assassins were already familiar with datura, as it was one of their several ingredients they used in explosive devices and smoke-based tools. After receiving the report, Ezio used enhanced tracking skills to locate her. When he detected a recent trail linked to the plant, he chose to continue alone and instructed the apprentice to not intervene immediately. Ezio eventually found Mirella, who reacted by deploying a stun device to slow his approach before trying to escape through the streets. During the chase, she was intercepted by the apprentice, who restrained her long enough for Ezio to reach the scene. Ezio then killed her using a poison he carried, ending her efforts permanently. Oksana Razin was a Cossack from Odessa who later became a member of the Templar Order. She entered military service in response to concerns about Ottoman expansion in her region. After several years working as a scout and intelligence gatherer, including acting as a spy and surveillance agent, she was recruited by the Templars, who offered financial and political support in exchange for her allegiance. The Order considered her scouting and espionage expertise valuable, especially for operations targeting key areas of Ottoman influence. She accepted their offer and continued her work under Templar direction. Damat Ali Pasha was a former servant who initially served under Sultan Bayezid II. As Bayezid's long-term territorial ambitions declined, Ali found himself drawn to the Templars' political philosophy, believing their structure and influence could bring stronger centralised control to a region that he saw as unstable. He later joined the Templar Order, viewing it as means to promote authority and long-term order. In 1511, Ali became indirectly involved in events that also drew the attention of Ezio and one of his apprentices. A Templar tax collector whom Ezio's apprentice had earlier observed moving across rooftops robbed merchants of official financial documents in Constantinople. The two assassins pursued the collector, working at different levels, Ezio at street level and the apprentice from above. The apprentice eventually killed the collector and secured the stolen records, which were then returned to Ali. Ali expressed gratitude, questioned Ezio about the assassinating with him, but received no confirmation as the assassins avoided revealing personal or organisational ties. Later that same year, a bounty was issued against the same assassin apprentice who had recovered the documents. This resulted in an attack on them in the Grand Bazaar, which Ezio disrupted after being warned by a civilian observer. After defeating the attackers, Ezio and the apprentice exited the market complex, intending to expose additional Templar-aligned operatives involved. They were ambushed again in the Old Bedestan section of the bazaar by a separate group of armed Byzantine-aligned Templar supporters. Ezio then instructed the apprentice to conceal themselves, while Ali entered the bazaar shortly afterward with two guards, focused on commanding a public crackdown against the assassins. The hidden apprentice positioned themselves behind him and killed him without being detected. In his final statements, Ali asserted that the assassins repeatedly disrupted Templar objectives and that the Order's long-term influence would have strengthened regional stability if left unchallenged.